Right. See, we haven't had one in 2 months, have we? I got to learn all over again. Good evening and welcome to the September the 3rd, 2014 public hearing of the City of Brookhaven Planning Commission. I'm Stan Siegel and I'll be presiding this evening over the hearing. This public meeting has been called on matters pursuant to the Brookhaven zoning ordinance and specified on tonight's agenda. The September the 3rd, 2014 meeting is called to order. As a way of introduction, I'll call the roll and have each commissioner acknowledge their presence so you know who we all are. Okay, Commissioner Shannon Cameron is not here this evening. Commissioner Rob Francoeur. Present. Commissioner John Funny.
Present.
Commissioner Bert Levy.
Present.
Commissioner Caitlin Miller is not here. And we have a newly appointed commissioner who is not yet seated, and that is Commissioner Chris Boddicker. Hopefully he'll be joining us at the next meeting. And I'm Stan Siegel. So 4 of us are present this evening. That means we let the record indicate that we have a quorum, and we'll proceed. At this time, I'm going to do it too. I'll ask that everybody please turn off or silence your cell phones. Let's see who we have in the hearing. We have Ms. Susan Cannon, Director of Community Development, and the Assistant City Manager is with us. Mr. Ben Song, the City Planner, is right there. Ms. Becky Apter, and we also have an attorney this evening, Mr. Sam Thomas, and I apologize, I've forgotten.
Mr. Scott Hasty.
And Ms. Scott Hasty, thank you. You know, I think the next time I'm just going to introduce you and have you do this, because I do a very poor job of this. There should be a number of copies of the agenda and related documents at the back of the room. I will say that if you're going to make a comment this evening, you'll have to fill out a public comment card, and we'll ask you to check whether you're supporting or opposing the item on the agenda. The Planning Commission is established by the Code of Ordinances of the City of Brookhaven. Our purpose is to conduct public hearings on land use, zoning changes, code text amendments, and other related matters. The Planning Commission's actions are not a final determination regarding the matters before us, but only a recommendation to the Mayor and the City Council of the viewpoint of this Commission. I'd also like to say that in making our recommendations, we do the utmost to balance the land use issues with the interests of the applicant, the neighboring community, and the entire city of Brookhaven. All of us are intimately familiar with the city. We all live here. Many of us work here. And although you won't always agree, not everyone in this room is going to agree with what we recommend this evening, please know that we're doing this and voting to make Brookhaven a better place to live and work. Okay, so we've got a roll call, we've got amendments. Before we, one more item of business before we take up the agenda, so you know how we're going to operate this evening, what the process is. Many of you have been here before, but for those who haven't, let's go through this. The city staff will present a summary of the item on the agenda, and they'll report any recommendations or findings to us. If it's an application, the applicant or their representative will then have a maximum of 10 minutes to present. They can use it all up front, or they can use a piece of it and reserve a portion of the time for rebuttal after the public comment section. We'll then have the public comment section. We'll have 10 minutes for those in support of the agenda item and 10 minutes for those who are opposed to the agenda item. Each speaker, as I said earlier, will need to submit a comment card before they speak, and when you come up, we ask you to state your name and your address. Be aware that others will need the time to present as well. So we want you to be brief, we want you to be succinct, but we want to understand why you have taken the position you've taken. I mean, it's very important to us to hear what you have to say and understand why you've drawn that conclusion. As a courtesy to others, we'll ask you to limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. I mean, we don't have an unlimited time, but we don't want anyone to rush. We want everyone to be heard, and we really want to be able to explore the issue before us. Remember, zoning items can be emotional for both the applicant and the community as a whole. So, please kind of refrain from any personal comments or talking about your neighbors or the issue, and kind of keep the discussion on the issue of land use. As I said earlier, if the applicant has reserved any of their 10 minutes, they'll then have an opportunity to finish up their 10 minutes. We'll then close the public hearing portion, and each of us as commissioners will have an opportunity to ask any questions of the staff, the applicant, or any of the speakers who have been before us this evening, and again, to help us understand the issue. We'll then vote on the matter before us, and the commission can vote to recommend approval of the item before us, denial of the item before us, or we can recommend the item be deferred. And the process of deferral, we're allowed to defer an item one time for a 30-day period. Okay? Everybody got it? All right. We'll do our best with all of that. All right, first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes. We have approval of minutes of July 7th, 2014, the Planning Commission work session. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the Planning Commission work session meeting from the date of July 7th, 2014.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion on the matter? All in favor of approval signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay. Second item is approval of July 9th, 2014 Planning Commission regular meeting minutes. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve the July 9th Planning Commission regular meeting minutes?
All right, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. My third time, we usually get this right. Okay, so item number 3 is approval of July 23rd, 2014 Planning Commission special called public hearing minutes. I'll entertain a motion.
Chair, I'll move for approval of the July 23rd, 2014 Planning Commission special called public hearing minutes.
All right, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? No. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Okay, next item, organizational and procedural items. Do we have any?
Apologize, Mr. Chairman.
No, that's fine.
We do have one item. As previously discussed, there was a training scheduled for tomorrow. It was an all-day training. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, we do need to reschedule. We have yet to decide on a date, but we'll get that information out to all the planning commissioners.
Okay, this is, and it was listed as a work session, I believe, I believe it was listed as a work session, Planning Commission work session for tomorrow.
It was listed as that because the software
Right,
constricts us to that, but it was
Right, I was
actually a
just-
training
I
session.
want to make sure the public understood that's what we're talking about
Yes.
here is, it was training for, particularly, I guess, for the new commissioner, Chris Boddicker, right before he can be
Who
seated.
is here?
Well, let's introduce our newly appointed commissioner, Chris Boddicker. Welcome. And we'll, as soon as we get you trained, we'll thank you. I'm glad you were able to be here this evening. Any other items, Ben?
That is all, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, anybody have anything? Okay, then let's get into it with the unfinished business. First item on the agenda of business that we have started before is the Comprehensive Plan 2034.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the second public hearing regarding the Comprehensive Plan 2034 to come before the Planning Commission. When this particular item traveled to the council in August, on August 12th, the council asked that it be remanded back to the Planning Commission for additional time for public input. So that's the purpose of remanding it back to the Planning Commission this evening. This has been about a 5-month process. It's been a community-based, steering committee-based plan. We have Amanda Hatton here this evening, who has been the lead consultant with Jacobs, who's going to give a brief overview. The plan has been posted online for some time. We've had quite a bit, as you know, Mr. Chairman, as you steered the committee. We've had quite a bit of involvement. We've had the plan online. We've had a community survey. And we would ask from a staff perspective that after you hear the presentation from Amanda this evening and after you have the public hearing, the staff would recommend and ask that you recommend approval of the plan. This will then travel to the council for their meeting on September the 9th, which is a very quick turnaround. During the council hearing on the 9th, the role of the council at that time would, again, to have a public hearing and to authorize transmittal of the plan to ARC and the state for regional review. It would not come back to the city until November for final adoption. So we ask from a staff perspective that you support this plan. And without further comment, Amanda Hatton will make a brief overview presentation to you. She's not going to go from the very beginning all the way to the end. I think she's going to touch on some of the character areas and what came out of the review. And then if you have any questions, we can try to both tag team and address any questions you may have. And then obviously, you'll need to open up the floor for public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Amanda, I apologize for not recognizing you earlier. You were hiding there in the back, so.
Been a while. Well, thank you, Chairman Siegel and other commissioners for having me here. Again, I see that I was at your last commission hearing, so it's a pleasure to be back. At the last public hearing with the Planning Commission, I gave a more detailed overview of the comprehensive plan, how it had been developed. But today I'm going to really hit just the highlights of what's actually in the plan document. And with that said, and no further ado, I'll go ahead and move forward. Just to summarize, Comprehensive Plan 2034 is really the de facto future development and growth plan for the city of Brookhaven. We looked at a 20-year time frame, so we're looking 20 years out for what the vision is for the area's future growth and development. It documents the long-term overarching community goals, and also what are those things that we need to do in the short term in the next 5 years to move that vision forward. It is intended to be a day-to-day guide for city staff as well as elected officials and commissions like yours to help make informed decisions based on community input. And of course, this plan, as Susan already alluded to, is based in an in-depth public involvement process that provided various opportunities for public input. And the last point I want to make on this is that the plan is meeting one of the state's planning requirements. All municipalities and counties in the state of Georgia are required to have a comprehensive plan and to update it at minimum every 5 years. The plan is framed around a few key elements. First of all, I already mentioned the 20-year planning horizon. Again, we are focused on those next 5 years and what we need to do to move it forward. The plan is framed around three key elements, and those are the community goals, which frame the overall vision for the community, as well as the future land use plan, priority needs and opportunities, and those in turn inform the community work program. And each aspects of the plan, each of those aspects was informed through a public involvement process specifically tailored to address each of those items. I do want to point out that although this is a land use-based plan, we also looked at other key substantive elements that the city is involved in implementing, and those are up there in green on the screen, and they include community facilities, population, economic development, demographics, which I already mentioned, and housing. And so that flows through all the way to the implementation program and some of the specific actions that are recommended as a part of the plan document. And of course, another important point is to highlight that this plan has been coordinated closely with the other concurrent planning efforts that the city has going on, including the transportation plan, the Parks and Rec plan, your Beaufort Highway redevelopment plan. So this plan is compatible with those, and there has been a lot of back and forth to make sure that they all together lead you down the same path. So jumping into the actual plan content, as I mentioned, one of the key aspects is the community vision. As at the top of this overall community vision is the city's vision statement, and a couple key things to highlight here are that Brookhaven will be a national model for a walkable urban community. And on top of that, the city will preserve those things that makes it unique, including its parks, its neighborhoods, and its sense of place. And so this vision statement was formed through our public involvement process and input from the steering committee. Another key aspect of the plan is that future land use component. The future land use element is communicated primarily by the character area map. The character area map identifies unique areas of the city of Brookhaven and what's the long-term vision for those areas over time and what are the appropriate implementation steps and policies to guide that development. And this, again, was developed through in-depth public involvement and getting feedback on what had been drafted and a very iterative process of forming it. At the end of the day, we have 13 character areas. 8 of those are primarily residential in nature, and 5 are community activity centers of varying intensity. And I'll go into each of those in a little bit of detail here in a moment. Part of the future land use plan also considers some important characteristics such as gateway features, neighborhood commercial target areas. We also look at areas requiring special attention and how those should be considered as y'all look at development decisions down the road. That includes your national historic districts, your natural resources, including your creeks and your floodplains, and some of those other regionally significant resources like your trail network. We also looked at resources for active living and priority redevelopment areas based on previous planning efforts and some of the input that we received through the public involvement process. So what I'm going to do is walk through each of the character areas very briefly, starting at the north at 285 and move our way down to the southern portion of the city at I-85. So the first character area we have is the perimeter center. This area is envisioned to remain a high-intensity area of the city. It's really seen as the most intense area. That's the vision that was communicated to us in the planning process. Over time, it having mixed-use residential and neighborhood commercial, one of the key aspects is making sure that there's appropriate buffers and transitions to the adjacent residential areas, which that is the next character area, the Lakes District. This includes the areas around Murphy-Candler Park and Silver Lake, several neighborhoods in this area. The area vision is preservation of single-family neighborhoods and complementary infill development. There's also an opportunity to potentially develop a trail along the Nancy Creek up there, and that comes out of, in part, the Comprehensive Transportation Plan and the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. The next character area is the area surrounding Ashford Dunwoody Road and Johnson Ferry. This is the second of the 5 community activity centers I mentioned at the beginning. This area is envisioned to be a walkable walkable neighborhood mixed-use center over time, strategic redevelopment of older existing uses, and ensuring that it's really a complete streets environment where the pedestrian has a priority as well as getting traffic through the area. If you move slightly to the west, you have the Linwood Park character area. This is, again, is one of the 8 residential areas. The vision is to preserve the traditional neighborhood character over time and have complementary infill. We do point out one of the neighborhood commercial areas as being appropriate here at the corner of Windsor and Osborne Road. Historic Brookhaven, just to the south there, this includes both the National Historic District and also some of the gateway areas into the area. The vision, again, is to preserve the existing historic structures and the preservation of large lot residential. We do recognize in the plan document that you do have gateway areas in the northern portion of this district that have slightly different lot configurations, and so that would be considered a little bit differently from that historic core, but cohesively they do make up one character area. The Osborne character area is just to the east there of historic Brookhaven. Again, the vision that we received from the community over time was to preserve and maintain the existing neighborhoods. There are some opportunities to promote walking and biking. You're very close to Peachtree Street there, and also connect with some of the residential uses in the area. After that, we get to our third community activity center, and that's the Peachtree Corridor Overlay District. I said this, the last two public hearings, we heard loud and clear through the visioning process with the public that the vision for this area is consistent with what was envisioned through the Livable Centers Initiative study and other planning efforts in the area. It should continue to be pedestrian-friendly urban boulevard and continue to develop in a medium-density mixed-use fashion. And we also identified through the planning process that this area is the most appropriate for your future town center. Just south of Peachtree Street, we have the Ashford Park Drew Valley character area. This is both north and south of Dresden Drive, maintaining and preserving the existing single-family residential character is the vision here. We also envision some neighborhood commercial developing at Dresden Drive and Claremont Road, and also an opportunity for Claremont Road to be enhanced over time. And that's one area that we did identify there needs to be more exploration by the city and community members to really define what happens along Claremont Road in the future. The Brookhaven Heights and Brookhaven Fields character area is just south of Peachtree Road there, adjacent to Drew Valley and Ashford Park, again, preserving the residential character of this area, ensuring compatible infill housing is the vision here. Lennox Park is the fourth of the 5 community activity centers. This one is seen as becoming a live, work, play environment. Right now it has the live work component, has the work component, but not necessarily the play component. So looking at as infill opportunities occur, adding more destinations and infilling so you create more of that live, work, play environment. Briarwood Park is one of the few remaining character areas I'm going to mention. Briarwood Park is seen to continue as a high-quality, high-density townhome and condo development area, so furthering that character in the area. The Briarwood Park has an important role in that area's future, and one thing I want to point out is that the Parks and Recreation Plan and the Beeford Highway Plan both see this area as a potential opportunity to evolve over time. So when y'all look at doing your 5-year update, this might be one of the character areas that might change in size or some characteristics based on how that plan moves, those plans move forward. The Roxbury character area is the last residential character area. Again, maintaining, preserving, and enhancing the existing single-family housing in this area, ensuring compatible infill. That's the vision here. And the last area, of course, is the Beeford Highway corridor. The long-term vision is for this area to transition from an auto-dominated suburban corridor into a denser, more walkable urban corridor. One key theme is preserving affordable housing and also adding additional active and passive park space. Again, leaning on the Beeford Highway Plan and the Parks and Rec Plan to some degree in those 2 areas. I did want to point out briefly that the Beeford Highway corridor, because it is a very big area, we have identified 3 different intensity levels or intensity zones, with the highest intensity development being appropriate along I-85, just east of Beeford Highway being, or just south of Beeford Highway being a medium intensity zone, and then your lowest intensity zone abutting the neighborhoods on the northern side of Beeford Highway. There are also 2 activity nodes in that corridor at at the Briarwood Park area and also at Druid Hills, where those areas would be treated slightly differently than those 3 zones. So as I mentioned earlier, there's also a community work program in addition to this future land use component. The community work program is probably the most important aspect of the plan. This goes back to those substantive elements I mentioned at the beginning. There are 100 action items currently in the work program, and for each of those we identify appropriate party to implement an estimated cost, funding source, and the time frame for implementation. And that will help inform budgeting decisions with the city in coordination with all the other planning documents and budget decisions that influence council's decisions. So that's a very high, quick presentation of of the comprehensive plan. I did want to point out that, as Susan already mentioned, that the plan is online. It's been online since mid-July for public review and public comment. The next hearing is targeted for next Wednesday with City Council, and then adoption again targeted for November. And that is my presentation, and I'm happy to help answer any questions you
Yeah, I
all
think
may have.
It's actually next Tuesday,
Oh, I'm sorry.
September 9th.
At what time? 7, is it
7
7?
o'clock.
At 7 o'clock in the chambers. What I'd like to do is, if anybody has any questions, let's open the public hearing, go as we normally would with an application, hear from the public, and then if you all have any questions for either Amanda or the public, so I'd like to kind of keep that process in place. Thank you, Amanda. We appreciate all the hard work. And with that, then, I will open the public hearing. Do we have any comment cards? Anybody?
We have not received any comment cards related to the comprehensive plan.
Well, you're about to get one. So you have your back turned.
Yes, does that mean I'm up?
Come on up, tell us who you are and where you live, and that's,
All right. I'm Catherine Bernard. I live at 1321 Oaklawn Avenue. I'm here on the comprehensive plan, and I have two basic concerns about the plan as it is, which I have been studying over the past few weeks. It's a very complex, dense piece of information, and it requires people to reference a lot of other different pieces of legislation, other reports, so it's not something that I think we can expect people to get through very quickly. And so my concerns about it, I have some concerns about our specific comprehensive plan process. I have some other concerns about the comprehensive plan process itself that, are certainly not unique to the Brookhaven plan, but I think are a larger problem around the state. But I first wanted to start off with what I think is the most important one, which is there's no capital improvements element in our comprehensive plan. So ideally, this is something that we are supposed to be getting out of the way, getting everything taken care of that we might need as a community. But from my understanding of reading the relevant laws, if we don't have the capital improvements analysis in our comprehensive plan, we're not going to be eligible to use the developer impact fee whatsoever in any kind of Brookhaven development. And that seems to me like somewhat of an oversight and something that, as we're talking about fairly extensive development throughout the area, up at the perimeter area, in, at the MARTA station, at Buford Highway, that's a significant area of development, and if we do not have access to the developer impact fee, it seems like that's a tool that we're just leaving on the table. And so my concern is that if we're spending all this time and money to put together a comprehensive plan, it should cover all the exigencies that we might need as a city. So that's one of my concerns. I think another one is that our plan, it's very granular, it's very involved. It requires quite a bit of, honestly, what I think goes to the point of micromanagement when it comes to economic development. It makes references to getting customer relationship management software and making a list of, what businesses we need and what businesses we have. Honestly, this seems kind of duplicative of the Chamber of Commerce. There's a lot of things in the comprehensive plan that seem like great ideas, but they aren't necessarily things that we need the central Brookhaven government to be taking care of. And I think that's something for us to consider. And if I could move on into some points that I have that are more of a concern about the entire comprehensive plan process. One of the references that has been made tonight and is made in the comprehensive plan is that we are required by law to have a comprehensive plan as a city. This has been, from my perspective as someone who has looked at this, that is a complicated claim that does not appear to be exactly true under state law. State law authorizes us to have a comprehensive plan, but there are just some Department of Community Relations regulations that say, well, you're not going to be eligible for certain grants, et cetera, if you don't have a comprehensive plan. So a lot of people are probably thinking, well, what's the difference? Lawyers picking at these little, unimportant semantic issues. But I do think it's an important issue because I think it's very representative of something I've noticed, like I call it legislative creep. Basically where a piece of legislation is introduced, great intentions, oh, this is voluntary, cities can just opt into it if they want. And then gradually a thicket of regulations gets built up around that law that makes it non-optional anymore. And I think that's what's happened with the Georgia Planning Act and comprehensive plans. I think it has become mandatory when it was not initially intended to be. And I think that's something that we should acknowledge when we're talking about why we're doing the comprehensive plan. excuse me, I've been reading about this all day, and it's some very dense material, even for people who have studied legislation. So that brings me to the next point, which is,
Well, before you start the next point, which I'm going to let you do, because we had asked everyone to limit their time to 3 minutes, but you have a total of 10, I just want to check, make sure there isn't anybody else, and if there
Sorry
isn't,
about
then,
that.
then we're going to ask you to continue. Okay, keep going then.
okay. So the process by which this has been done, I was looking at sort of the guideline process that the Department of Community Relations has sort of set out, and it does appear that our process is abbreviated even by those standards. We're looking at a 5-month process so far, 6 months, if it extends to October or November, and a lot of that takes place over the summer, which is not a time when most people are thinking about local government issues. They're taking their vacations, the kids are out of school. It's not the time when people are quite as laser-focused as at some other points during the year. So I have to respectfully challenge the assertion of Amanda, who spoke earlier, that this was an in-depth public comment process. I went to the charrette, I went to some of the hearings, but I try to follow this stuff closely, and I didn't even hear about it. I think if the city has enough money to send out mailers that list all the good things the city is doing, let's talk about the comprehensive plan. Let's send out something that goes to everybody that we know everyone is going to see. So even in terms of the web survey that was available, I don't think the percentage of people that has participated, just based on my anecdotal observations, has been that high. So my conclusion after looking at this is that something that is this important, it's a day-to-day guide, it's a strategy guide, this is serious business. So even if we accept that a comprehensive plan is a good and important thing for Brookhaven to have, there's no capital improvements element that's going to limit us. I don't think the process has been long enough. I think there's, we're being pushed to say, this is legally required. It is not legally required to go through this fast, and this does seem to be an abbreviated process even by the standards of these comprehensive plans. So those are my concerns as a resident who's been looking at it, and I would respectfully ask that we can possibly take longer to consider this as a community and get more public comment.
We appreciate it, and we appreciate you taking the time
Thank you.
to educate yourself and to let us know. Thank you.
Well, and if I've gotten anything wrong, it is very complex local government legislation, so if I've gotten anything wrong, I would certainly appreciate, being corrected by any city staff, so.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have anyone else who'd like to speak on it? Okay, if not, we'll close the public comments section, and we'll open it up for the commissioners. I know I have a few questions, and I'm sure others do as well. So public comment is closed, and any questions? Bert, you want to start on your end?
Sure. As we've been asked to review the plan, I kind of struggled for a while and to figure out, well, how do I evaluate the plan? And maybe it's because of similar training, but like Bernard, I went to the rules and regulations to try and figure out, were there objective standards? And I did look at as well the Georgia Department of Community Affairs regulations. But I came to some, I guess, it appeared to me that we seemed to be we were hitting all of the ones that were absolutely required, but I was curious too about some of the ones that we passed on. I didn't know if this was because we were first time out of the box or if there were conscious decisions as to what we were going to improve or include, such as the capital improvements element. And I wasn't sure if the housing element was covered so that we would qualify for under the HUD rules and things that are set out in the regulations. Those are sort of my comments. Otherwise, I think it seems like we've had public participation, and I know we can always question as to what you could do better, how inclusive it can be, but, at the end of the day, you felt like, okay, this was something that pulled a lot of stuff together, but the real proof is going to be, too, in the implementing it and whether we follow through on all the things there. But I'll start with the questions first as well, what was in and excluded.
So that's it, to help, because I don't want to get into.
Would you like to list all your questions and
Yeah,
then let us
that's what I was going to
respond?
say.
Okay, thank
Are there
you.
any specific, because I don't want to get into just a
No.
kind of general discussion, since we've had, I understand, we've had, months of that, I'm sure you appreciate.
Oh, absolutely.
But if you have a specific question about it, I think it needs to be asked and answered.
Yeah, it was more sort of following up on the comments that we just heard, but identifying what was making sure we've covered the elements that are required, and then as far as any optional items that we omitted, any rationale for omitting those.
And is that appropriate for Amanda?
Do you
or-
want to go down one by one and make the whole list and then let us respond, or?
That's all my questions, so I'm going to yield at that point.
Mr. Levy covered the questions
I'm sorry?
I had. I
Okay.
don't have any additional
Then
questions.
just hold, okay, and we'll come back here, then I'll,
Okay, thank you. And I guess I'll preference my question, well, first I'll preference my statement, which will lead into my questions, by indicating that this have no indication about Jacobs, Amanda, or the staff here at the city. I think everyone's done an excellent job with working to make sure that the city of Brookhaven have a good product. My question goes back to the question I asked the last time, and it related to transportation. And I still didn't hear that we've actually tested the scenarios or the alternatives of the regional center nodes against the transportation model to see, are we too intense? Do we need to adjust the land use because of the reactive nature of the transportation system? I still am not too clear on that component. And I think it's very important that as we look to enhance Brookhaven, that we do not overbill ourselves where we can't move around. Transit is not everywhere, and we need to rely on our roadway network system. So I'm still a little fuzzy on that transportation component. And I would agree, you would answer my
well,
question?
I was gonna say, do you want to, is that
Well, it's a
addressed to
question,
Amanda
that's
or
one
to-
question.
Okay.
Well, if I can interrupt for just 1 second and then correct me, but, so first, I think the first question is about local planning and the process that we followed. The second is about the CIE. There was another question about housing, a question about transportation. I think those are the questions so far, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And I have
And
one- I have
my
one more
question was, are you addressing this to, would you rather the consultant or the?
I think we're going to have to tag team.
Yeah, that's
That's fine.
I'm going to take the
have one
local
more
planning
question.
question and the process question.
All right,
I
just
guess
one-
I was interrupted, I wasn't
Yeah.
finished asking.
Well, I apologize.
No, no problem.
So we do it all the time to each other.
Yeah, I know, right? It's a friendly way of doing it. The last question, I asked at the last meeting, the regional center node that you're recommending at Beaufort Highway and North Druid, I think that's a very large node, or let me restate that. I think that's a over-intense land use for that node when our corridor is only Beaufort Highway. When I think about a regional center, I think about Atlantic Station, I think about Perimeter CID, because you have the massive land that you can do more with. But to say you're going to put a regional center at North Druid and Beaufort, I don't think the land is there to do that. So I raised that issue the last time, and I think it still showed up on your slide. I want some feedback on that. How are we going to build? We're not going to do the New York 50-story skyscraper there to get the density. So I just really need to understand, how would you fit a regional center in such a small area? That was the last question.
Okay, so do we have you want to go through, 'em? What do you think that we?
I've got the first series of questions. I think Amanda's going to address the housing and transportation in the regional center. But from a staff level, I'll address the local planning, the process, and the CIE.
Okay.
As far as the planning process, the 1989 Planning Act, of course, went into motion. And then the local planning rules were revised in March of 2014. So we followed the most recent local planning rules. Prior to the process that we've used in this particular comprehensive planning program, the planning process was divided into 3 different components, where you had a community participation plan component and an agenda component, whereas the process as of March of 2014 is a much more, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not as a divided process. So, as a matter of fact, the March 2014 process required a kickoff hearing, which we did have, where we outlined the process that we would use so the community would be aware of that process. In regard to the CIE, we do not have impact fees in the city of Brookhaven. You are required to have a CIE in your comprehensive plan if you have impact fees. we do not have impact fees in the city of Brookhaven. That's a whole different set of rules and regulations. And as you all know, the comprehensive plan is not a law, it's a policy. Impact fees are designed to have development offset the burden of increased impact on infrastructure, and the use of impact fees does not retroactively correct issues that are currently in existence. So you would have to analyze the impact of new development on infrastructure to determine whether or not impact fees would be feasible or not for the city of Brookhaven. So if you were redeveloping, the amount of development that is there would be subtracted from any new development that would occur. So right now, the city of Brookhaven does not have impact fees, and the law is the 1990 impact fee law. And we do not have a CIE because we do not have impact fees in the city of Brookhaven. And I think the remaining questions were housing and transportation in the regional center mode, and I believe that Amanda's going to address those components, those questions.
Yes. Thank you, Susan, and thank you for your questions. In terms of the housing element that was raised, housing is one of the components that we did look at in the plan. It is one of those 6 green items that I highlighted at the beginning. There are recommendations specific to housing, and we also do cross-reference the DeKalb Consolidated Plan, which is the county-wide plan, including all the municipalities for addressing special housing needs, affordable housing, and things of those nature. And so the plan does meet the housing element requirement of the state planning requirements. And to add on to that, and some of the things Susan mentioned, we did regularly communicate with the Atlanta Regional Commission about the plan, what the content is in here. Did they have any recommendations for improvement or things we hadn't considered? And so there has been a two-way dialogue between the region and their administration of the actual planning requirements. In terms of the transportation component, the Comprehensive Transportation Plan team did take a look at the land use plan before they produced their model for transportation and the ultimate recommendations of the transportation plan. I can't speak to the specifics of it, but there was definitely back and forth. Are there any improvements or changes? Are there any conflicts or issues that you would raise based on your further technical analysis that we need to consider changing? And the communication back to us is that there were no issues. We did make some small tweaks to some of the character areas regarding connectivity and pedestrian crossings, so that made those elements more compatible with the plan, with the transportation plan. So the transportation plan did take a detailed look at what had been drafted. As I mentioned, the comprehensive plan draft has been out for we're going on near 2 months now, so it's been out for a while, and they had a chance to look at it.
Let me interrupt for just a second, because it might help. Can you tell us what date, when's the next public hearing, or when does comprehensive transportation plan is going to be adopted?
Well, the transportation plan will be on the agenda on September the 9th, as well as this plan on the 9th, and Beaufort Highway and Parks and Recreation. Whether or not the city council adopts the plan, it will be on the agenda for consideration for them to determine, for the council to determine what
And
they...
a public hearing at that point as well.
The comprehensive plan will be public hearing. The remaining 3 plans will be public comment.
I guess I wasn't too much concerned about when it was going to be, what's the
Okay.
process and approval. It's more of the inner workings of the plans as one plan effectively being changed because of the other. And from what I'm hearing Amanda saying, that they did have an opportunity to have an exchange with the transportation planning component to make sure that we're not overbuilding ourselves. The land use piece here that we're using is the future land use plan that developers are going to show up in this meeting format and say, we want to put this here because your future land use map says it can receive it. We don't want to put ourselves in a corner where we have transportation issues that needs to be corrected because of the intensity of the land use. That was my biggest concern. You're presenting this to us staff, this is directed to staff, It has a section for transportation. We do not have the transportation component in here, and you're asking us to approve this. So now, after this point, I suspect that it's going to be slid in, but we haven't had an opportunity to really vet the transportation element associated with this plan.
Well, that's correct, in that the comprehensive plan, land use plan, is the plan by which the planning commission, we need to seek a recommendation from you on the comprehensive land use plan. As part of the planning process, this is the plan that has to travel through the planning commission and the council under the planning requirements for public hearing procedure and for adoption. The reason that you see the other tabs in the appendix of the plan are so that at the end of the day, if and when the council adopts the comprehensive land use plan, this comprehensive land use plan references the other three plans. So in November, if the council adopts the comprehensive land use plan, we will then include the other three components that you're aware of, the transportation plan, parks and recreation, and the Buford Highway plan, so that we do have a plan that is unified in that the other three plans are also referenced, and that all four planning initiatives were considered at the same time. But the actual plan that the planning commission needs to make a recommendation on is the land use plan itself. We tried very carefully to make sure there was a rational nexus between the comprehensive land use plan and the other three plans, and we feel that the consultants and steering committees did come together and were aware of what the other three plans were.
So you
This is my final comment, and I have to say this. As an engineer and as a planner, I think it's my job to make this statement. And as a planning and engineering firm owner, we've done several comp plans. And the comp plans that are always presented for adoption or approval by any authority or any body typically have all the components in there. And I'm a little bothered that this is in front of us as the land use component when we do not have the other elements to basically look at the complete picture. So I just want to state that, because when I work with cities or counties, I make certain that this document includes everything so that the full story is told. So I'm a little bothered by that. I know we were going through the process to get this done in such a quick time. I understand that. But I'm just a little bothered because I would want to see the full document.
Well, I certainly respect your comment, Mr. Funny. I would never do anything other than that. We do have a portion in here that is a transportation element, and then it does further reference that we would have a comprehensive transportation plan. So your comment is respectfully taken and considered, and I thank you very much.
You had one other question that had to do with the
No, that was
Buford, that was it?
She answered that.
The
No, I
Buford
didn't.
Highway.
No,
No. See, it was a good question. I wanted to know the answer.
I'm so caught up on the transportation.
I want to go first.
Go ahead.
Answer this one.
Commissioner
Go ahead.
Funny had pointed out that we have indicated for the Buford Highway Corridor a regional center at the intersection of Druid Hills and Buford Highway, and the circumference there is shown as a quarter-mile walking distance from that intersection. That is actually based on a previous planning effort, in part, the Buford Highway Multimodal Corridor Study, which was completed by the Atlanta Regional Commission, and they identified regional centers along the Buford Highway corridor, and that was one of them, as well as the Claremont Road and Buford Highway intersection. And through the planning process, and also taking into account what the Buford Highway Plan had concluded and recommended, that area stood out to us as making sense as a regional center, and the terminology might throw us off. I know we all have connections with what a center is versus a node versus something else, but the intent is this to be a walkable quarter-mile area. Some of the recommendations from the Buford Highway Plan was that this could accommodate a major residential development, multi-story residential development that takes advantage of the views down Buford Highway to the city of Atlanta, and it also could accommodate a new hotel with a possible convention space. So that's where we use the term regional center. It's also one of the areas targeted for a major gateway into the city right off of I-85. So that's the rationale behind why it's shown as that. Center, I can see how it might be interpreted the wrong way. It's certainly not a regional center like perimeter center as a whole covering a much broader land
Maybe we
area.
should change the name of it. It's not a regional center. You're saying it's a walkable center, basically a walkable community. When I think about a regional center, like it's stated here, that's a drive destination, I'm here, but not something that's going to be walkable. I'm not going to walk to Atlantic Station from Gwinnett County or from Brookhaven. It's more of a destination center with, that's a regional, has a regional impact. It's pulling from the entire region.
Right.
So I think the wording maybe need to change on that.
Right, and, we're happy to take a recommendation to change the
I have-
wording of that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And with that, then I'll come back, because we're going to have to, I mean, we've been through a 5 or 6 month process, and we're not going to, I think, here be able to answer some. But I have 3, I think, fairly quick questions. Number one, I want to make sure I understand, I think I do. When you talked about the Briarwood Park character area, you are not talking about the park. You're talking about the area surrounding the park, and you use that as a name. Is that correct?
Right, Briarwood Park Neighborhood Center.
Okay, that's fine.
I believe I might be getting it a little off, but it includes the park, but the residential area
Well,
around it.
I've seen some comments that people thought when they see it, they say Briarwood Park, they think there are things going on there that, are not, that you're including the whole area. Okay. The second question, I think, was similar. It was up in the Blackburn Park Neighborhood Center, and you talked about pedestrian areas having priority over automobiles. And can you,
Yes.
can you comment on that, I guess?
Sure, right, and I think it relates to one of Mr. Funny's comments also. We heard overwhelmingly in the public involvement process that this area needs to be more walkable. It's surrounded by several neighborhoods. You already have a major mixed-use development that's under development currently, and it's becoming a walkable area, so it's important that the area support a complete streets environment, which is an environment that's appropriate to cars and pedestrians and transit and bicycles. And, one of the adjustments that we made based on our coordination with the transportation plan was removing some language that said multiple crosswalks or regularly spaced crosswalks, because we need to defer to the transportation plan and what's appropriate to ensure that we can get the traffic flow through that area, as well as make it a safe environment for pedestrians.
Okay, so
to
it's not
move around.
pedestrians to the exclusion of automobiles.
Right, exactly.
And then the last question I have, and then we'll come back, and then we'll close it off, so that I know we have a lot of people waiting for a lot of things, but this is very important to us. And I heard the answer, or at least I thought I did, but I want to make sure I understood it. The public comment was there were no capital improvement programs in the plan. And is that true? And if so, why, wouldn't that? Right.
There was no capital improvement element in the plan.
Okay.
And a capital improvement element plan is required if you're going to have impact fees. There will be budget needs based on the action items that are in the plan. It's not necessarily a capital improvement plan. The council will receive in their packet additional information relative to numbers, because there will be budget allocations, different funding mechanisms that have to be determined, and how we move forward with budgeting of the action items. But however, a capital improvement element is not required in this plan because we do not have impact
It
fees.
doesn't mean it's not required. It's just not required in this plan.
It is not required in this plan. If we had impact fees, it would be required in this plan.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll have one more quick question. We'll try to keep it because we're going to try to close it out, but
Of the list of stated goals for the Beaufort Highway District, one was increasing density, and another was to maintain and enhance affordable housing. If I put those two together, is there an implication that new development will have an affordable housing component as a requirement or as a goal?
That will require further decision-making from the city, but the Buford Highway Plan specifically spoke to this as a model where you have market rate apartments combined with affordable housing, and that preserves the overall quantity of affordable housing in the corridor over time. So that's what's laid out in the vision and the Beaufort Highway Plan, and as I mentioned earlier, we cross-reference that plan as an important consideration as development decisions are made, but that would require a formal policy decision and implication in your zoning code and code of ordinances. Again, the comprehensive plan is a guide. It's doesn't have the effect of law. It's a guide, and then your code does the work for it. So that's a decision, and I'll let Susan chime in if she wants to add anything, but that's something that y'all will need to look at further. One of the recommendations of the plan is to look at updating your zoning and development regulations to ensure it's compatible with the recommendations of this plan and the other planning efforts.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. Again, I apologize. I think we've all, there have been a lot of hours and a lot of hour days and a lot of public input. As you said, I think there's never enough. You'd always like more public input. You'd like to have, I said at a city of 50,000, I'd love to have 50,000, you just don't get that. It's just not realistic. But I do think that we got a large number of active ideas and thoughts in the, that's my pitch for the steering committee. And with that, then I will call for a motion on a recommendation for the Comprehensive Plan 2034.
All right, I'll do it.
So we don't plan this ahead of time, anybody.
All right. I will move that we recommend the adoption of the Comprehensive Plan 2034 as has been proposed and has been maybe modified between here and the council.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we have a motion to recommend adoption of the Comprehensive Plan 2034 to the City Council. Do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Do we have any discussion on the motion?
One discussion, I think we were going to change the terminology associated with the regional, the way that the node is described at Beaufort Highway and North Druid. I would like to ask for a friendly amendment to the motion to include that revision.
I would accept the friendly amendment so that.
So where we would recommend, as I understand it, there's a motion and a second, and you're asking that the motion be amended to, that the plan be amended to where it says regional center, to call it what?
Whatever designation the staff has determined would be appropriate for a walkable center, I would recommend it to be changed to that.
I think you might, yeah, I think you'd need to say what you'd like it to be, and
Well, they may not like what I have to say, so I would ask that staff, because I would make it a neighborhood character center. But if staff can provide the character of that designation that was described by Amanda, that would be appropriate.
let's give them a moment to see if they can come up with a.
I mean, because basically she described it as a
No,
walkable,
I understood. I just leaving it open, I mean, I think that should be.
and then I'll make the motion, I'll ask for the friendly amendment with the term that they come up with.
Do we have a suggestion?
Might
Susan?
we offer that we use a term from the Uniform Growth Policy Map from ARC applicable to your concern, Mr. Funny?
Would that be okay with you?
So we don't have that term, because I'm thinking about the ARC one, and they don't have all of the character areas.
Well, they have a series of definitions based on their Uniform Growth Policy Map. If that doesn't suffice, let us caucus again. Hold on.
Let me see the other one.
I mean, it's up to, it'll be up to you. I mean, it's your motion We have a second. There's a discussion if you want to accept.
I mean,
Or-
I'm wondering if perhaps that can be dealt with at the city council, that perhaps staff could consider that in their recommendation, but that we vote on it as is with the,
Okay, so we have the motion to recommend the comprehensive Plan 2034, the council, and we have a second. We've had our discussion. I think hopefully it's been duly noted, John. I mean, hopefully they've heard, it's on the record now if there's a question about it. And all in favor of the motion to recommend it, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Oppose?
Okay. So the motion carries 3-1 to recommend to the city council.
Thank you.
And I would say, I think that hopefully the staff will, look for something in there to,
Well, I mean, here we go again. Let me just make a comment, because this is something that should have been clearly identified in the goal setting for this plan. Identifying the terminology that are going to be utilized for the character area that we're looking to specify. And this is why I'm opposing this. When you're developing a comp plan, that's set up front, and the steering committee and the stakeholders are educated on what each of those character area looks like and feel like. And to have it in front of us for approval is just, I just really can't approve that. I wouldn't have expected to have a plan in front of me where we don't even know the character areas of the areas that you want to define in our city. I'm still speaking, Stan.
yeah,
Mr. Chairman.
I know, but you have to ask, there's we can limit debate, and there's no place
This is
in.
personal privilege for conversation.
I think we'd have to have if I remember right, there's a limit to the amount of impersonal privilege.
You've given me the floor to speak, and I'm speaking. So you have given me the floor. If you didn't give me the floor, I wouldn't be speaking. So I'm only saying that because when you define the goals, this is something that is defined up front. And for us not to have this here, that's why I'm opposing it. So I just want your staff to know why I'm opposing this, for us not to have the right designation on the area. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. All right, moving on. The next item on the agenda of unfinished business is ordinance ORD 2014-07-04, RZ 1409, text amendment to the zoning ordinance for concurrent variances.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The original text amendment for the concurrent variance was brought before the Planning Commission on July 9th, transferred over to the City Council on July 22nd. The Mayor and City Council deferred action and requested that staff provide more information to the public in regards to the concurrent variance, which we have done through an executive summary that's been provided in the actual packet. As previously mentioned, we do have the city's land use attorney, Sam Thomas, as well as Scott Hasty here to present and to provide an overview of the executive summary and also to answer any questions that the Planning Commission and the public may have. Thank you.
Yes, again, I'm Sam Thomas, and thank you for having me here tonight. I'm with the law firm of Bovis, Cal, Birch, and Medlin. I have with me my associate, Scott Hasty. My practice has been in the land use area and local government law for the last 40 years. And we were asked by Brookhaven staff to assist in the preparation of an amendment to your ordinance, which would allow concurrent variances with rezoning applications, special use permit applications. Currently, what you have is your rezoning applications, which are separate and apart, and then any variance application would go to the Board of Appeals. So, first of all, in my practice, I have practiced in jurisdictions that have concurrent variance provisions. I practiced in jurisdictions that have separate provisions. And I think in DeKalb County, DeKalb County itself does not have a concurrent variance process. There are a number of cities in DeKalb County that do and some that don't. I I do a lot of practice in Fulton County. Fulton County has a concurrent variance process, as do most of the cities in Fulton County, including the newer cities in North Fulton County. Before I get into the details, it's been at least my experience over the years that where you have conditional zoning, which you do in this jurisdiction, that concurrent variance is sort of a, I don't know if I would want to say necessary component, but I think it's a very functioning component of the zoning process. And I think it's actually serves the city in terms of being a better guard against potential legal action because it's a more consistent collective, one-body review, the entire picture, the entire process. And I think the non-concurrent variance process can create conflicts that actually create more potential for litigation. With that said, we did prepare the variance at the request of staff, and we understood from the prior meeting, there were a lot of questions that came up, some at the hearing, some through emails, and we were provided with some of those. And I certainly would say that every one of those questions was very pertinent. It was obvious that it's an important issue to you, and so no bad questions. And there's not necessarily a right answer that, well, of course you have to convert variances. It's my preference that you do. I think it makes it easier on your staff. I think it helps your city from a legal standpoint. However, again, many of your questions were philosophical, and not every jurisdiction has the same philosophy. So with that said, just very briefly, I'll go through what we understood some of the concerns were, and I tried to outline those in the executive summary, and I've hoped that you have had an opportunity to review that. I think one of the main concerns that we saw was that there was concern that by allowing concurrent variances, the city council would be usurping the authority of the Board of Appeals, somehow illegally usurping the authority of the Board of Appeals. And we just wanted to make clear from a legal standpoint, and I'm sure that some of you know this, of course, that the power to plan and zone vests absolutely and completely in the city council. The city council can, if it chooses to do so, delegate some of the planning and zoning functions, and most do. Most do have a Board of Appeals, and some, again, have concurrent variances and some don't. But there's no constitutional requirement, there's no statutory requirement, there's no charter requirement that the city of Brookhaven even have a Board of Appeals, or that every variant, if you do have a Board of Appeals, that every variance has to go to the Board of Appeals. That's just established through your zoning ordinance, and the local government has the ability to modify the zoning ordinance if they wanted to change that process, and that's what it's intended to do. Actually, if you have legal challenges to concerning whether there's been a delegation of authority to a lesser board, those challenges are usually that, well, that's an unlawful delegation, and you can't make that delegation. It really needs to be reserved to the local government through the city council. But the way that is covered is that, like, for example, with a Board of Appeals, they don't have legislative discretion. What you do is when you adopt your ordinance, you establish the criteria that they are to review variances with. And that's a different review standard. So you're not or the city council is not assigning any of its legislative discretion to a Board of Appeals when they, by ordinance, say, these are the criteria that you must consider. So that's where you really actually sometimes would see that, that challenge. So I just wanted to let you know, again, you have the ability to do that. You have the ability to not have a Board of Zoning Appeals. You have the ability to have a Board of Zoning Appeals that hears variances that are part of a rezoning application, or you have, your options are there, but it's best with the city council as to what they think is more appropriate. I think there was another concern that it would cut down on the public participation process. Actually, you generally find, and I think through the your existing ordinance and through the amendment, that you'll actually have more public participation because of the additional requirements in a rezoning application, the hearings that you have, the public participation policy that you have, and the fact that the issues are going to be heard by one body at the hearings that relate to that. You'll have that you generally will find that you'll get more public participation that way. Also, you create a situation where you have your rezoning application, and you grant the rezoning, and then you have a variance procedure later heard by your Board of Appeals. Many people who come to that Board of Appeals meeting may not realize that there were issues that were dealt with at the rezoning that really can't be discussed anymore here or can't be brought back up in the subsequent hearing before the Board of Appeals, because they're limited just those items that relate to the variance and the variance only. And if you have the combined process, they're getting an opportunity to actually, give their concerns when it's heard as a whole and when they have the whole body of evidence and the applicant's presentation, the staff's presentation, all the public comment, and not down the road find out, well, we can't even talk about that now. I think that also there was concern, which I think, and again, very legitimate concern, that perhaps if you have variances concurrently with the zoning process or zoning approval process, that there would be an opportunity there that the approval of the variances would just be sort of ad hoc, because if you're going to approve the zoning, then you're going to approve the variances. And that's a legitimate concern, and we've dealt with that on a number of occasions. There are different standards. In your hearing process, the staff would be required to, again, make their findings and recommendations with respect to the criteria for rezoning, which has legislative discretionary aspects to it. And then they would also have findings with respect to the variance, which would be limited to the criteria for the consideration of variances. And the staff report would set that out, and the council would have the Planning Commission and council would have an opportunity to have that presented to them in that way so that that would be understood. And we would think that that would, and have seen it in experience, that it does not lead to just the ad hoc approval of variances in connection with what may or may not be approval of the rezoning. Also, we get into the aspect of the benefits of concurrent variances, and I've mentioned that briefly. And the benefit is there more so in what is evolved into the modern era of zoning, which is conditional zoning. That is, you don't just zone to a category. So now you've got a category of zoning, so then you maybe come with some sort of development plan, and then maybe you'll need some variances for that. What we've done now is typically, and you've seen it through your through your experience so far. Your staff will present recommendations for approval or denial, and they'll include conditions of approval. And the conditions of approval are, assuming the recommendation is to approve, those are designed to ameliorate the potential adverse impacts that the change in zoning category would have. So you may have it conditioned to a particular site plan, or you may have it conditioned, to a certain number of lots. You may have it conditioned that you've got to set aside a certain amount of green space. In conjunction with that process, it may be by imposing those conditions that make it a better project for the community that you create a situation where variances become appropriate. You'd rather have development shaped in this way, which may include a variance or two to make it a viable project, but which protects the interests of the community better overall. So that's why we say that we feel like, or at least in my opinion, that with respect to the conditional zoning, which Brookhaven has a conditional zoning ordinance, that the use of concurrent variances is a necessary element to make that effective. You also kind of create a catch-22, or you can. It doesn't mean you can't get around it. It doesn't mean you can't do it either way. From the standpoint of staff approves or recommends, and Planning Commission recommends, although it may change the recommendation a little bit, and then it goes, City Council approves and recommends, or actually approves the recommended rezoning with conditions. It may be conditioned to a site plan. The site plan actually shows that the setbacks are different than they would be if there weren't variances. So you create a situation where you've got your conditional zoning that's been approved. So you send it to the Board of Appeals, and the Board of Appeals, if they deny the variance that is incorporated into the site plan, then the project really can't be developed. And so maybe those conditions, then you create an action against the city by the developer that these were unconstitutional conditions. Or conversely, you could have a challenge, although it's much less likely, from property owners. Because as I think you know, the ability, when I say property owners, I mean neighbors, the ability of neighbors to challenge rezoning actions is a more difficult standard than it is for the developer. Most of the lawsuits that we come in, and most of the lawsuits that certainly I defend, are brought by developers. And we know, we've seen them come in various ways. And we have been, I think, more successful. Well, we've been gives us an easier case when we have a concurrent variance process. So I just mentioned that. And then also, I think there was, and I'm not sure we actually covered it in this conclusion, but there was a concern about the appeals process and the fact that there's a different standard review of appeal for the grant of or denial of a rezoning versus the grant or denial of a variance request. So are we creating a situation where on one side we have a rezoning application that has concurrent variances and it goes through one process, and then we have a variance request that doesn't have any rezoning aspect, it just goes straight to the Board of Appeals? Are we creating two categories of review of variances? And we've dealt with that situation before, and at least in the cases I've been involved with, the Superior Court has been able to deal with that effectively. The standard for review in a legislative zoning case, you're allowed great deference. If there's an appeal, then, however, to the Superior Court, then the appeal is what we call de novo. That means you start over. It's like you do the zoning case and you don't have to, you're not limited to the evidence that was presented at the hearing before the City Council. You can bring in experts, you can bring in new evidence, you can do all of those things. And that's a de novo review. On the other hand, with the variance, whether that variance is a concurrent variance that was part of the rezoning process or whether it is a standalone variance, it's an on-the-record review. There's no new evidence. The court there is really, the Board of Appeals in that case is more like the trial court, and the Superior Court's more like the appellate court. But at least in 3 cases I've been involved with it, that has happened, and the courts were, able to review. They applied the same standard to the variance that they would have applied if it had been alone independently. So we don't think that creates a different category of treatment for the applicants in those situations. Again, I'm here to answer any further questions you have or, amplify on anything you think I should. I think we tried to cover at least most of the things that were communicated to us from some of the questions I believe you presented through email or conversations with staff or in the actual meeting. I think there may have also been some public comments, and the ones we had, we tried to address. So with that, if you have any further questions, I'm available, or however you'd like to proceed.
Okay,
Mr. Chairman.
thank you.
If I may add, I failed to mention that as part of the City Council amending the text amendment back to the Planning Commission, they requested an additional public hearing be open.
Right.
And that the public hearing was initially held during the July 2nd meeting. In addition to that, for the Planning Commission to also make a recommendation, additional recommendation related to the text amendment.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you. So we'll follow the same process rather than us starting questions, now, because what happens is we get caught up with the technical. I want to make sure we have listened to everybody. So we'll open up the public hearing process. We'll hear from everyone, and then we'll open it up for questions for ourselves. So do you have any comment card? Public hearing is open. Do we have any comment cards?
Yes, sir, we do. We have a public comment card in support from Jed Beardsley.
Okay.
I believe so, unless, that is the only one, yes.
Catherine Bernard rule for 10 minutes instead of. Talk to me later.
All right, well, come up, Jed, come on up. Yeah, we'll do that after, you could do that afterwards.
After the meeting.
So I'll do the same thing. I'd ask you to limit you to 3, and then if nobody else says, hey, they'd like to comment, then you get the remainder of your 10.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, members of the board, for hearing me. Upcoming member of the board, staff, counselor. I'm here in support of this concurrent variance proposal. My name is Jed Beardsley. I live at 1081 Hunters Brook Court in Brookhaven. I am the vice chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals. I am here really just representing my own personal views. I wanted to share my experiences from the ZBA with you to help you as you consider this. I am not speaking for the board as a whole. I haven't talked to any of the board members about this. I let the chairman know that this was here tonight and was going on, and made sure he had a copy of Mr. Thomas's memo. But I am here purely to give my own personal views to try to help you. I also have 2 suggested changes to the text amendment that I want to explain, and I'd like to do that at the end of my comments. So I thought Mr. Thomas's memo was extremely good. I wanted you to know that my initial concern was, when I heard about this, was, wow, they're trying to usurp the Board of Zoning Appeals, take away a function that is properly with the ZBA. I've studied the law, I've read Mr. Thomas's memo, and you really have to think about it, as he put it, that the ZBA exists as a delegated authority. So we serve at the pleasure of the council. And so if the council says, we want to claw back one little piece of the process, and we want to be able to hear a variance case when it's highly appropriate and there's a pressing need to do so, personally, I'm okay with that, because who am I to tell the mayor and council what they can and can't do when they appointed me? However, the ZBA does have an oversight function, and it's an independent body, It's not subject to political pressure quite as much because we're not elected. We don't have a personal agenda. We aren't trying to get elected to anything. And so there is kind of a little bit of a neutrality of the ZBA, which I think is important. And variance cases, for the most part, are about trying to determine whether there's a hardship, determine whether certain standards are met that cry out for a variance because of the complexity of the zoning and the planning laws and how you can never fit a certain lot or a certain need into a certain box. So the variance process is important. But I don't see this as a separation of power issue, really. I think it's, from my standpoint on the ZBA, it's okay if the mayor and council want to use this ability. Again, I have some suggested changes. As for public review, it's important that the public be able to be heard on these things. And as part of the public participation plan for what the cases you hear, you really have more public possible involvement than we do in the ZBA. ZBA, we have one meeting, one hearing, unless a case is deferred. In the case of a concurrent variance, it would go before the informational meeting. It would then go before the Planning Commission, and it would go before the mayor and council. So that's potentially 3 meetings that neighbors who want to comment on a case have to attend. To make them then go through another zoning ZBA hearing is even another hardship in a sense on the public. Our ZBA hearings, many of them go till midnight. If you're the last case on the thing, you've got to sit through a lot of stuff. That's hard for many people. So it makes sense to allow this concurrent variance. And in particular, where they're reviewing a site plan, and the site plan has certain needs that have been created to fit in the new zoning category that you're going to hear, and oh, there's a creek nearby. We need to address the stream buffer. We need a little relief from the stream buffer. Or, if we push this project over to one side to meet a setback over here, or a stream buffer over there, then we'd need maybe a variance over here on another setback. Or you know what, maybe in lieu of a setback, we could impose on the zoning conditions a vegetative buffer requirement or something like that. So from my standpoint, looking at how complicated these cases are and how sometimes we're as a zoning board are trying to write conditions of our approval of a variance, likewise, the mayor and council and you all doing a rezoning case might want to impose conditions. It gives you, you and the mayor and council another tool in the process. And I think it can lead to more cohesive planning. It certainly can avoid the catch-22s that Mr. Thomas described in his memo where the planning and zoning and the mayor and council have approved some zoning, but the site plan requires a variance. And now you've got both an owner who's trying to sell his property and is a citizen of Brookhaven. You've got a developer who's got financing pressures, cost pressures, trying to hold a deal together to have to go through an entirely separate process that could drag on another 2 or 3 months. Is that efficient? No, I don't think it's efficient. I think it's more efficient to hear all these in one place. And so efficiency of government in the planning process is important. I think Ms. Cannon's comments include the reflection on this efficiency need. So I think there is a good reason to allow these concurrent variances. And it is important that the review standard is different, and this affects you guys too. The review standard for variance is like an SLUP or a special land use permit. It's different, okay? It's not the legislative function. It's a review against a certain set of criteria or a certain set of standards. As long as you recognize that and take those into account, and the way the case will be structured, they're separate matters. You have to vote separately. I think that should work. But here's where my problems are, and here's where I think I would like you to consider, and like Mr. Thomas and staff, to consider 2 changes to the text amendment. The first is that the text amendment talks about concurrent applications. They say allow these applications to come together and be concurrent. but it doesn't require, and I think it should require, that the variance decision be part of a concurrent zoning decision. And so by that I mean that if the mayor and council, or you, and then recommend the mayor and council decide, yes, we're going to grant this zoning amendment or amendment to the zoning map or amendment to the zoning case, or even an SLUP, if we're going to grant that, then we have the power to grant a variance too. If we're going to deny the rezoning or the SLUP, I don't think you and the mayor and council should have the authority to say, oh, it's a separate application, we'll just grant the variance only. That, I think, would usurp the power of the ZBA, and I think that imposing a requirement that the variance can only be approved as part of a primary application, and that if they don't approve that application, then they don't have the power to approve the variance, then you would want the variance deemed withdrawn without prejudice, okay? So that the developer would not be stopped from coming back later and filing a variance application if, in fact, okay, well, we can't get 2 R75 lots out of one R100 lot, we'll just have to go do an R100 project. I don't know, but I think it imposes one little limit which might prevent the mayor and council from controverting the ZBA regime. So please think about that, just making the power to approve the zoning application conditional on actually approving the case in the major case in point. And that if that variance application be deemed withdrawn without prejudice, so if they can't rule on the variance application, that they don't have to deny it, okay, which would then cause a problem with a reapplication. My second suggested change, very minor point, but in 27, Part V of the text amendment, Part 5, Section 27-923B, I was curious that you all thought that one notice sign could serve for both a zoning application and a concurrent variance sign. And I think there should be 2 notice signs that the public would best be served by seeing the 2 different color signs, knowing there's 2 issues going on here, and alerting them to the dual nature of the application. I think that is more transparent to the public to use 2 signs. And I don't think the efficiency or the cost is so great that it outweighs the need for full disclosure to the public. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Beardsley. Thank you, Jed. Okay. Do we have anyone who is in opposition? Do we have any comment cards in opposition to this?
Yes, sir, we do. We have one from Terrell Karsten, sorry.
Is it, how many do we have altogether? Just the one?
Just,
Okay, so
just
we
a
know the
single
time.
one.
Get to introduce yourself again and tell us where you live.
Terrell Karstens, 2444 Oostenaula Drive, speaking as a private citizen only. Once again, I just want to remind you of the letter I sent previously. I appreciate this additional information that's been provided tonight. In my opinion, there really was no concerns or no explanations concerning how this works, or who has this or who doesn't have this. This comes down to just the city of Brookhaven, and if we want this, and if the citizens want this. I think that's where the consideration needs to be given as far as the citywide representation. Instead of a district and mayor and council representation, a citywide representation of the board, I think is more accurate. I think that's a better checks and balance process, just like I said previously before. A lot of stuff, again, tonight is being brought up about developers. That's a major concern of mine. This isn't being done to make the process easier, make the process better, make the process more convenient for developers. It's being done for the city of Brookhaven and the citizens of Brookhaven. So I once again ask that you deny concurrent variances, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Terrell. Anyone else?
No, sir.
Okay. I can see glazed eyes at this time. All right, then we'll close the public hearing, and we'll open it up to, for any questions, the commissioners might have of the staff, the attorneys, or the people who have spoken. You want to start on this side?
Yeah, I've got some questions.
He was waiting. That's all right, I have some questions too. so.
Okay. And I have sort of two categories. One is just more mechanical.
So is this to the staff or and the,
I think the staff, as well as perhaps Mr.
That's right.
Thomas,
Yeah.
may need to
Sure.
weigh in, but at least on the first part of mechanical, maybe more staff-oriented, but before I get into the, I guess, the reasonings behind it. But first, in the mechanical side, and this was, Mr. Thomas did start to speak to one of my questions about with how the appeals would work, but more on a basic level of, so, or let's say this passed, and we have an applicant then who files for the concurrent variance, so they would first, of course, have to have the application for the rezoning or for the SLUP, and then have a separate application, separate form, separate fees, or it's all part of that process for the variance. Then that would come before us. At that point, do we consider, essentially, the question is, first, the zoning case, and I'll just stick with, just for ease of the example, just a pure rezoning question. Do that, have one hearing for that, have a vote, then go to the variance, or one hearing and have one vote on both of those, where we would then have to apply the two separate standards that would be involved. So that's sort of the first mechanical question, how it works here, which is not as important as then what happens when it goes in front of the city council, because they're the ones that, obviously will make they actually do something.
okay, you want to?
So I'll start with, start with that.
I think it's contemplated right now that you would have one hearing where both would be presented, but you would have two votes, separate votes on the application for the rezoning and the variance. But I would not have two separate hearings to close that, nor would I have one vote on both. Because, it may or may not be appropriate. That's what would be intended, but that's, if you've got something you think that works better there, we certainly would consider it. Susan?
Very similar to a rezoning and a special land use permit application, you would have one hearing and two votes.
Would we get, well, let me ask a question. I know, I'm trying to avoid that. I didn't know what happened there.
And we've spoken on that, so.
And we heard you.
If this were to be approved by the council, Becky, would we, as planning commission, have the opportunity, I would assume we would, to write into our process for a hearing? I mean, we established and voted on a process on how we hear cases. If there is a change in this ordinance that allows concurrent ordinances, would we then have an opportunity, I assume we would, to redo our process however we chose to?
You would have an established hearing procedure.
Right.
So if there needs to be an amendment, then you would need to vote on that.
Okay.
And
that's
we
what-
would place the procedure in the back of the room.
Right. So we could modify our procedure as well?
Sure.
Okay. So does that answer your, okay, second?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then following with that, then, and this goes more to the city council and how they handle it, with the understanding that the zoning issue is typically, it's the de novo, the variance is on the record, then will the city council also essentially follow the procedures of the Board of Variances where, on the record, have under oath or deem the witnesses, people talking as deemed to be under oath, so that they're building a record that way. And that would sort of follow into the practical matter of how the court actually reviews it.
Well, the record in a in a variance case and a zoning case are basically the established similarly. There, you would not, in order for the variance to be heard, you would not have to, and to be appealable in conjunction with maybe the denial of the rezoning, you would not have to have the witnesses under oath. You just would have the procedures where you record the testimony. So, I mean, you might have to work through it a little bit, but that's the way it would be presented. There wouldn't be a separate swearing of witnesses as relative to the variance issues.
Okay. And then, as far as the actual appeal process, obviously, there is no such thing as a direct appeal of the pure rezoning. In our ordinances established for the variance that's gone before the zoning board, they can go by a writ of certiorari. There's nothing that really specifies, and that may be more because it's in keeping with the idea that this is a zoning question, but is there any specified method of challenge or appeal that's going to be for the concurrent variance, whatever comes out of the concurrent variance?
I don't think it would be a different method of appeal. Obviously, you have on a zoning case, you have 30 days to appeal to the Superior Court. You can, depending on what's in your zoning ordinance as far as the appeal of a concurrent variance or a variance, that may be specified as a writ of cert. Or it may be specified as a mandamus, or it may have no specification at all and then just be treated as the law says. If you don't have this, it's done this way. Typically, what I've seen is that if there is a zoning application with concurrent variances, the variance comes up with the zoning case, and the variance appeal really isn't acted upon and becomes moot, perhaps, depending on what happens with respect to the zoning case. And then they would act upon the variance itself.
All right, because that was one of the questions, because under our present ordinance, it's very defined for the variance coming out of the board, the zoning board. It is the writ of cert. There's been no specification for any other decision, SLUP or the rezoning, and so it would be, traveled either by the mandamus or whatever method was deemed
Right, and
appropriate.
that's a good point. I think that I think that what as a practical matter happens as a matter of law is that a court does take the variance with the zoning appeal, but perhaps we ought to specify that if there is a concurrence variance and there's an appeal on the zoning and the variance, then is treated as part of the zoning case from that standpoint.
Right, that was sort of one of my concerns, since one of the goals is to cut down on litigation. At least certainly the first person that comes up may have to deal with that and sort out.
Right, and
how they
that's
got there
a
properly.
very good suggestion.
Okay. Then the other,
Okay, I mean, if you wouldn't mind, we'd like to see, and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, that's fine.
For sure, but I want to see if Rob or John have anything before I come back to you.
I don't have a question right now.
Then I'll come, that was quick.
I want to hear.
I just want to make sure everybody. Go ahead.
okay. All right, and so now, going to the goals and the heart of the matter, and I do want to thank you for the memo, because I felt before we really didn't have any type of sense of, in particular, why this was being suggested and what the issues were that were going to be addressed, other than, well, let's not have to go through a couple of separate hearings. Okay, so with this, the idea being that, well, with the conditional zoning, which we certainly have practiced and will continue to practice, that if we impose a condition that is deemed to be somehow it's unconstitutional or becomes some kind of a burden, and we don't have the variance there to alleviate that. That was the idea, is that this will give us the ability to avoid that challenge, right? So then, I noticed too, in the code, we currently have where the development director can approve minor changes to conditions that develop, I guess, at the time of development. And then if there's a major change, and there's advertising and things that go in that under 27845A, and then if there's a major change, this is after rezoning, that has to come up, then that essentially could be done, but it would come through like a brand-new sort of zoning case. And so I was curious as to whether having that already in our ordinance, is that sufficient? Or, again, having the concurrent, will that give us a better tool than we already have?
My opinion would be that a concurrent variance would be a better tool than what we already have, in that a minor change versus a major change, a minor change relates to something that would not include a variance. There are certain administrative variances that, from a staff level, we are able to grant, but anything that would go beyond that administrative level, in my view, would not be considered a minor change. It jumps into a different category of review. So I think that the concurrent variance is a better tool for the city to use, and it gives the ability for everyone to see the product at one time. So that's my position.
Okay.
I have a few,
Yeah, real quickly.
Okay, sure.
We have already, too, in our current ordinance, as I read it, at least, with the neighborhood conservation district, concurrent variances are built in and already allowed if we're approving that. It was in the traditional neighborhood district, which that was repealed. And I don't think there needs to be any coordination between the current ordinance and those provisions, but I didn't know if anyone had looked at that to decide and make that determination.
Could you restate that? I'm sorry.
That under current ordinance 27-481.15 under the neighborhood conservation district, that provides for concurrent variances to be considered at the time that we're considering the neighborhood conservation district. There was an older provision in the traditional neighborhood district, but that whole system was repealed. What I didn't know is, given the existence in that neighborhood conservation district, do we need to look at how this proposed ordinance would affect that, or can they exist separately?
I think they can exist separately, but as you bring that up, we need to take a harder look at that, and we'll do that.
Okay.
Well, just to quickly touch, I mean, just looking at that specific section that you mentioned, 27-481.15, in terms of the process that it states out is pretty much the same process that we have outlined in terms of what we would follow. That's been listed in the summary, meaning that even in that case with a concurrent variance related to the NCD zoning district, the specific for the variance, although it's heard concurrently, the criteria will be based upon the variance criteria, which we essentially would be applying the same procedure.
All right. So I try to wait till I'm the end, and you can tell the non-attorney in the group right here, because I'm going to ask questions I don't have any. So first there's like 3 or 4 questions. First question is, who initiated this? Was this the council or was this the staff?
The staff met with the council, and the mayor and council initiated the text amendment.
Just give me, so we get it for the record, some of the neighboring municipalities that are in fact employing concurrent variances. I know you, Sam, I know you said that it was Fulton County did in general, but DeKalb County did not. But I'm thinking more about cities, that are in our, that are around here, that are employing this.
Let me go back and look at the memo I think we mentioned. I know that Chamblee and Doraville have concurrent zoning ordinances. I don't think that Dunwoody does. I think, and DeKalb doesn't. As far as Fulton, I know that,
Oh, no, I'm sorry, stop, Jed, I'm sorry. You know as well as I do. So just give me, I mean, I'll be specific. Does Chamblee allow concurrent, and one, do they have a planning commission that, in the same process that we do? I mean,
okay, why don't you, let me let Scott address that if that's okay.
I'm just trying to get a sense for who's doing this successfully and, or who's doing this. I won't ask you to judge successful or not.
If you look at concurrent variances, it's kind of a process that's in between a council hearing variances only versus a ZBA hearing variances. Concurrent variances are kind of an exception where, again, if they make a variance as part of a application for rezoning, instead of going to ZBA, it goes to the city council. Chamblee and Doraville, I believe, are the two examples listed in this document where variances are heard by the council themselves. It does not go before a ZBA.
So it's legislative.
Well, it's still zoning criteria.
Okay.
It's still
I mean,
criteria.
excuse me, the variance criteria.
Okay.
So it's on that one side. DeKalb would be on the other, where everything goes to the ZBA. And then in the middle, where there's a concurrent variance process, you have Fulton, basically the Fulton cities.
All right,
Roswell,
I'll be specific. Does Johns Creek?
Roswell, Alpharetta, Johns Creek, Milton, Forsyth County,
Okay, that's
they
the
all
answer.
have
Thank you.
concurrent
That's what
variances.
I'm trying to understand, are we, going to be the sole people to do this, or is this done?
I think you would
Okay.
be in the minority without it.
Okay. And then, Susan, I guess this is a question for you, and I hear a lot about, I think I understand the benefits to the process, right? I mean, you cut out going through 2 and 3 and hearing it. We hear it, and we have something, and we approve something, and 60 days later, or whenever the ZBA hears it, and if they don't approve it, then we kind of have this limbo, then the property owner has limbo. So I understand the process, the speed. I also understand, I think I do, the benefit to the applicant of just coming up one time and, making the presentation, we hear the public, we make it, and things move on. Help me understand the benefit to the neighbors, the community around. I mean, the ones who come in who are not the applicant, not the property owner and the developer, but the 6 houses, the 12 houses, the 50 houses that are, directly affected. I mean,
Well, I guess I'll take the first bite at the apple, and then I'll
yeah, I
let
mean, it's really
Sam
not a
go there.
legal question as much as it is a.
It's more about the dependability of the plan, being able to see the plan, and having the public be aware of that the plan that's being brought before the Planning Commission and Council in the public hearing is the final plan.
Okay.
And as Sam talked about earlier, sometimes if you can grant a slight variance to get a better design, and you've had public input, and the public has been involved in that process, and it gives the applicant reliability and predictability of the plan that's been approved, and it gives the public the awareness and the input of the final outcome of the plan, without it going to take another step to another board that may or may not grant that. Whereas if that plan can be seen initially, and it goes to the neighborhood meeting, and it goes to the planning commission, and it goes to the council, and that plan demonstrates the variance, and it's had public input, at the end of the day, the city, the public, the applicant, the property owner may come up with a better plan that benefits the city as a whole.
Okay. And then my last question, and then is, I really liked Jed's suggestions. How would we, if in fact we were to, would we incorporate that as part of our motion?
You could, the planning commission could recommend denial, the planning commission could recommend approval as it's written, or the planning commission could recommend approval with suggested language changes.
Okay, well, I guess my concern is if we recommended approval, and I don't know what we would do, I don't think we could craft the specific language. Could we recommend, could we have a motion that recommended approval with these two concepts?
Certainly, that
So
would
that
be.
you, as the attorney, do the language.
That would be permissible, and I'll just say, for the record, I think that it's not our intention, and we would make sure that it's reflected in there, that there would be a situation where if the rezoning were denied, that they'd act on the variance. Would be intention to do that. And I also think if the rezoning were denied, we could certainly make it, I would have no objection to being able to withdraw the variance, without prejudice. So if they wanted to just.
Yeah, again, Jed, yeah.
Right. So, so that they would
Could do that
still,
to
they
me
would
at a
have the
meeting.
ability to further pursue
Yeah.
a variance. It wouldn't be the intention to kick them out of that variance process.
I mean, I wouldn't have thought it was, but I want to make sure
Right.
that we, and
And
the
then I
second
think-
is the second is the two signs.
Yeah, and I don't know,
And I
I don't
think
really
that's-
have a comment on that, but
I think it's a really
leave
good
that to
idea,
Susan.
actually.
I wouldn't-
I mean, typically, the reason that we would do that is just for, posting one sign, but we certainly have no problem with posting
Okay.
two.
All right, so we've, unless anybody has a final question for this.
Well, no, I was going to suggest that
This
as
is back to the attorney.
as an additional option before us is also perhaps a deferral, so that we can give this a little more consideration. The staff can perhaps come up with the language so that we can have a more finished product to send up, would be another idea.
I don't know, is that, I guess that would be, is that an option
It-
considering,
That's an option.
it is an option, okay. Okay, so with that, I'll entertain a motion.
Chair, I would move that we defer consideration of the text amendment for 30 days to allow additional consideration for the issues that have been brought up today. We're also missing a couple of members, but perhaps that would give us, it wouldn't necessarily have to be a public hearing, I don't think, but we can come back and have additional consideration on it in 30 days, or whatever our next hearing.
Okay, so as I understand, the motion is to defer recommendation on this for cycle to the next, our next regular meeting.
Yes.
Second.
Motion and a second. So is there any discussion on this motion?
If we do that, if we pass this motion, do we then have another full public hearing?
Well, I believe you've just,
I mean, we're saying we might not want to do that, but would we be required to do that? Or
you're not required to do that. You've already had two public hearings, and you only needed to have one public hearing, and I believe Mr. Levy just indicated necessarily not having a public hearing.
Right.
So that is an option, just.
Yeah, my thought was we'll have a work session to talk about it, and then we can have our a meeting where we can have the vote on potentially whatever, we come up with at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think that's a good idea. I don't like the idea of getting into an endless cycle of going, but I understand your point is we've come up with 2 or 3 items here that would seem to indicate that this is not a finished product yet. And because of the importance, but I also agree with you. I think we've had the public hearing, we've had 2 public hearings, we've had our input. I think there are some changes. So, all right, with that, we have a motion and a second to defer this for 30 days and without a public hearing, to hear it again on our next cycle without a public hearing. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We got it, I think. That's good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the glassy-eyed people now. We can start that. I've lost my place. I know if I used the screen, I'd be better. All right. So we are, on one more item of unfinished business is RZ 14-10, Ashton Atlanta Residential LLC, a rezoning request from R100 to RA8 to construct 22-unit, and I believe this is Hermance Drive?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. RZ 14-10 came before the Planning Commission on July 10th. It was heard by the City Council on July 22nd and remanded back. There were some concerns that were brought up by the Planning Commission as well as City Council in relation to the development that was proposed based upon a site plan that was submitted initially in May 7th. I was hoping to get that up, but I'll get that up shortly. With that said, the applicant has submitted a revised application as of August 18th, in which they have changed the orientation, the majority of the buildings, wherein 14 of the 22 units proposed on site will be oriented along Hermance Drive, with 8 additional units directly behind it, fronting a private drive. With that said, the major change in terms of the development, in addition to the orientation of the buildings itself, would be the stormwater management facility, in addition to the limits of disturbance, wherein the original stormwater management facility was proposed to be located within the outer 25-foot portion of the stream buffer. With the modification to the site plan, it appears that the stormwater management facility, in addition to the limits of disturbance, would possibly abut right up against the state mandated 25-foot buffer. But with that said, staff would note, per the stream buffer ordinance that's been adopted by the city, the ordinance would prohibit land disturbance within the 35-foot stream buffer limits unless the Georgia EPD stream buffer variance for disturbance within the 25-foot state stream buffer is issued. And just to clarify, per your packet, the original site plan is shown on page 330, and the revised site plan is shown on page 371. And with that said, in terms of the overall recommendation of staff, staff recommendation remains the same, which is to recommend approval. They do have to seek a separate variance. In addition to that, a revised staff report was issued and included into the packet, which I would stipulate to, and also to the 15 conditions that have been recommended as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we'll follow the procedure that we outlined, and that's in the back of the room. So the applicant or the representative, you'll get 10 minutes, all of it now, or hold some of it. If you'll introduce yourself again. We do this often enough, we'll know who you know.
Right, yeah. Good evening, my name is Mike Busher. I'm the Vice President of Land Acquisition and Development for Ashton Woods Homes. Our business address is 3820 Mansell Road in Alpharetta, Georgia, and I'm also a Brookhaven resident. Thank you again for allowing us to come back through the process. Heard your comments loud and clear the first time around, so we worked pretty rigorously to figure out a way to solve this. By way of history, this was the site plan that you all loved the first time around. I think it was universally hated, so we tried to work out a different configuration. And when the salient point we took away was that the fronts of the units really should be predominantly facing the street. I think that was the big concern. Others were mentioned, but I think that was the big takeaway for us. Much in the fashion that our Savoy project on Hermance does currently. And so with those comments and with that feedback, we arrived at this plan, which I think accomplishes what you were looking for. As Ben pointed out, it comes with some constraints, and those were pretty well documented to begin with. The stream is still there. We still have buffers. I actually think we can live, bad choice of words, I think we can work around the 35-foot buffer and not encroach into it. So I think from a material standpoint, that was our engineer's concept of where the detention is, but we are aware of the 35-foot state buffer, and I think we can stay outside of that. I think our principal concerns remain, though the recommendation for approval is great, that the condition was to remove that back to 20 units per acre, or sorry, 20 units total. We would ask for consideration to allow up to 22, barring, or I suppose I should say, depending on the results of the concurrent variance. A couple other conditions that are worth noting, and then I'm going to reserve my comments for rebuttal. There were 3 conditions that concerned us. The first was the total density. The second was the final wording of condition 12. We need to understand a little more about what staff wants us to do with the removal of this particular pipe. I don't recall seeing that condition the first time around. If I missed it, I just missed it. Otherwise, I would have called Ben quicker on it. But I don't recall seeing that. So we just need to understand exactly what staff needs, and our engineer can call Bennett, and we can work through that, hopefully leading up to mayor and council. And then last is the amending for condition 15. What we would like is to have the ability to have our storm or sewer encroach into the buffer. That's pretty typical for developments, and it doesn't specifically mention that. Maybe it was that staff already intended for storm and sewer to be allowed to be put in there if needed, but since it didn't say it, we want a clarification on that. And with that, I'll reserve the rest of my time.
Okay, Mike, thank you. All right, Ben, do we have any? So with that, we'll open up for public comment. Those will be, we'll start with those in support of it. Do we have any?
Yes,
I
sir,
think we have one person, I know.
We have 3 speaker cards in support. First would be Alan Coates.
Okay, and again, if you'll introduce yourself, and we want to hear what everybody has to say, but we would ask, everybody limit their.
All right. My name is Alan Coates. I live at 2978 Hermance Drive. It's one of these 6 properties. I've lived there for 35 years. I've read the information packet, and it seems that a key sticking point is the zoning density being higher for this than properties around this development. And it says that with the implication that that's a bad thing. But I want to argue against that. To do that, I want to go back to when these 6 houses were built on Hermance Drive. If we were to do that, go back in time, there are only 2 other buildings on Hermance Drive right now that were there when those 6 houses were built. One of them is a school building that's across the street. The other is what I'd like to nominate as the worst public eyesore in Brookhaven, and that's a shack that's boarded up on Hermance Drive. You go by it every time you go to Costco down to Windsor. It's terrible. Those are the 2 properties that were there when those 6 houses were built, nothing else. Let's fast forward a little bit in time to when I moved into those houses. One of those houses is in the early 70s. The school across the street was a methadone treatment center. And on the other side of where LA Fitness is now, there was Fraternity Row for Oglethorpe University. If we were to have an organization then that said higher density development is bad for Hermance Drive, that's what we'd have now. These 6 houses, Fraternity Row, low-income housing, Peachtree Garden Apartments, Johnny's Shack down at the end of the street. So I think what we got on Hermance Drive right now is far superior to that, and it's all because everything that was put in there was a higher density than what was there before. Has been asked for and recommended is that we cut back on this development by 2 units to lower the density by a fraction of a unit per acre. Unfortunately, that seems to be where the profit margin is for the developer on this, and they very well could walk away from this because it's not profitable for them to do this at 20 units when it might be for 22. So I just don't think it makes sense to reduce this to 20 units and lose the whole deal, lose the income tax revenue, the property tax revenue that could come from this for the sake of a fraction of a unit per acre and the notion that higher density than surrounding properties is a bad idea, because that's what Hermance Drive is. If there's any time left over, I would like to use it for one more point.
Thank you. All right, do you have another card?
Yes.
Only if he can shut off his.
Yeah, I'll be first.
I think Ben is multitasking over there.
I think he is
Multitasking
too.
here.
He
William-
usually does it with a lot of class.
William Harrison.
Hi, my name is William Harrison. I own the lot at 3002 Hermance. It's on the north end of the six properties. I am speaking for this development, and the main reason is because I'm hoping to make some money by selling my property. I also think that this represents a unique opportunity for the city for similar reasons and other reasons. I think that the only reason that this offer is on the table right now is because these guys happen to be in the neighborhood. I don't think another offer is going to come along anytime soon. And I lived through an offer failing in 2007 when the economy went south. I don't think that anyone's going to come along to build high-end, expensive townhomes like this. And certainly, I don't think that on this street, on those 6 lots, that the idea that a residential home builder is going to come along, purchase one or any one of those 6 lots and build a more expensive home in that area is a very likely outcome either. And what that means to me is that this represents the city's opportunity and the community's opportunity, because I think without these guys, there probably is no deal. And this deal increases tax revenue by approximately $132,000 annually, based on 22 families at an approximate rate $6,000 a year. My taxes are about $3,000. So then these houses will be worth much more. And of course, the presence of the 22 families ripples throughout the local economy, with your stores, shops, restaurants, and other services. I also, like Alan, believe Ashton when they say they need 22 units instead of 20. And I think that if they only get 20, then the only place that they can compensate for that is from the six landowners, or well, I guess there's 4 landowners, but the 6 lots. And I really think that's going to kill the deal. Now, I also was at the prior meeting, and I heard some local residents objecting, and I think that their objections certainly were heartfelt. I think that they objected primarily on the basis that this development might interfere with their enjoyment of the community. Well, keep in mind that these are individuals whose developments, where they live now, actually interfered with the natural enjoyment of the area that existed around these 6 lots, that once existed around these 6 lots.
Mr. Chairman, 3 minutes is up.
Yeah.
3 is up?
3's up.
Okay, am I done?
You can say, you could conclude. And in conclusion.
Well, basically, I was going to recap the years that this house was built in 1955. The people I bought it from, I've known for 50
Okay.
years. They bought it in 1971. That was roughly 12 to 14 years before Crestwick Forest. And that was the first of the 5 streets that now filter through that.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank
Harrison.
you.
I'm sorry, we try to get everybody. There's someone else, right?
Yes, sir. Mary Ellen Layden.
This is in
It's in support.
support.
Yes.
Well, I just want.
Good evening. My name is Mary Ellen Layden. I live at 2942 Crosswick Forest Drive. I am here in support of this current plan. The objections that the gentleman before me raised are objections that I personally had the last time I was before you. The lack of privacy and the invasion of houses so close to the lots along Crosswick Forest Drive was a real concern. I've worked with Ashton Woods on this, and they have changed their site plan. And basically, the change in that site plan protects the privacy not only of my backyard, but of the yards adjacent to my home. I can't say enough for the quality of the people in Ashton Woods and what they want to accomplish. I would love to see a slight change in the plan whereby some of the units are moved a little bit farther away from Crosswick Forest Drive. I've talked with Mike Busher about this. He is willing to consider that, and when he says he is, I trust him. So I recommend approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mary Ellen. We appreciate that. Ben, do you have anybody else?
No more speaker cards.
Okay, so, and anybody else? Nope. So we will close the public comment section, and we'll open it up to questions from the planning commission. Now, let's see, where did we start last time? I think we started over there, so we'll start over here, John, with you.
Oh, I'm
Or you
still.
wanna pass?
Yeah, pass, I'll come back.
For the applicant, if you could remind me, the original site plan included how many units? Staff recommended what number of units, and now obviously we're down to 22 today, so refresh my memory.
Original site plan was for 22. Staff recommended 20. Our current site plan proposes 22.
Same 20. Okay, thank you.
Let me ask
But
Brian
yeah,
to come back to yours. or-
The staff had recommended a number of conditions, and there were a few that you had questions with. I wanted to first confirm if you state the ones that you aren't accepting, and by implication, are you,
112 and 15, 112 and 15, I believe is what.
I just want to make sure, and then you accept and agree to the other conditions that they have proposed.
Right. The first request was of course, to preserve the density to 22 units. Wasn't maybe specifically a condition, but just the request. The point of clarification on 12 was, it may just require some rewording and/or clarification with Ben leading up to council. I'm not so sure I have a complete understanding of what needs to take place, but I think what our engineer, I just sent him the comments tonight while we were sitting in audience, and his concern was, all right, if we need to move it, what can we do inside the buffer? Where do we have to replant? There's just more at stake by that condition maybe than meets the eye. So I don't have a reword for you yet. I just would like it to highlight it so that hopefully Ben and I can work on it prior to mayor and council. And then last was 15, and that was to allow for our storm and sewer to encroach into the stream buffer. Again, just didn't know if staff took that as a given, or if we need to specifically call that out as a possibility.
I'll ask, if I can, I'll ask Bennett the question, did you take that as a given, or was that?
Are you referring to one particular
15.
condition, number 15? It was my interpretation from looking at what I would call a conceptual plan, that it was not unreasonable to expect that the development could occur in a manner that they could stay at least 50 feet away from the creek. I'll qualify my statement by indicating that obviously I'm not involved in the details of the design of the development, but it looked like that was a reasonable possibility.
Okay.
So the reason why that condition was recommended is that looked like that was a reasonable possibility, and we'd like to see them attempt to achieve that.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, I do have
Yeah.
one question. Townhouse number 20, it looks like 22, 21, and 20, it looks like the streamline is running through the property. Am I seeing that correctly? Yes. Can you elaborate on that? What will that do as it relates to the impact of those properties?
Me or Ben?
You.
Okay, sorry.
No problem.
You know, I think what it's going to come down to is these site plans are conceptual for a reason. The concurrent variance won't go in that direction tonight about, how that may have been, how we may have been able to accomplish this better. But for the purpose of the site plan, it was really just to show 22 units. It's about really as detailed as it's going to get right now. You're right, that as shown, those three may not work. What we may end up having to do is take Mary Ellen's considerations into the design, try to shift unit 15 north, and then perhaps change the configuration of the 14 units at front to something that's maybe a more narrow unit. Those are 24-foot as shown today. So those may end up moving to an 18-foot unit, which is what's, just for basis of comparison, the units at front at Savoy happen to be 18-foot wide. We may end up switching to that configuration to actually achieve 22 and going to 18s. So short answer is that it just depends. It depends on what we ultimately figure out during the variance process.
Other question, Mr. Chairman.
Give me more than I'll
Yeah.
do. You want along the same line, so.
I'm looking at the property line. If I'm reading this correctly, and I'm using my iPhone flashlight, it looks like the right-of-way for the roadway is a 60-foot right-of-way, which would be 30 foot off center. And if you look at the property line in front of the house, in front of the townhomes, it looks like you're encroaching public right-of-way. Are you purchasing public right-of-way, or do they just need to shift everything back?
Which unit in particular?
The entire frontage on Hermance.
Yeah, I don't think we are.
I'm looking at your property line, and it's actually, the center line is listed as the approximate LLL, and 30 feet on the other side would be the end of the right-of-way. And if you look at 30 feet going towards the property, you're encroaching it. So I'm just not certain, I'm clear on, are you buying public right-of-way, or?
No.
Okay.
I'll double-check the point.
Okay.
Just don't know right now.
Okay. I have first, this is probably for this, more for the staff than you. Would, give me the lot coverage on it between, everything around there is RA5. And this is RA8. The difference between the two, the lot coverage on between on RA5 and an RA8? One's 135 and one's 50 or something? I can't remember
No,
what the.
both are 50.
I'm sorry?
Both are 50.
So what's the difference between the two? Is it just density?
Yes, it's density, because RA5, you're limited to 5 units to the acre, and RA8, you're limited to 8.
Okay. And I guess this is a comment. I'd like to see this thing built. I mean, I would. But I'm having a very hard time. We just enacted a stream buffer. We just went through a heck of a public debate about stream buffers in this city. And one of the first things that comes before us, I shouldn't say one of the first things, is, heck, not only do I want to encroach a little by a foot or two, I want to put 2 whole units. Actually, that would be an exaggeration. I want to put half of 2 units and a piece of a third unit. I mean, if there were 19 units on this property, I understand I understand what your economic argument is, but if there are 19 units built, then we could have a quality development here without encroaching on this stream buffer that we just had this very difficult and heated debate in this city. And I'm just struggling with this because I'd love to see this built. I love what you had, the Brookley. My wife always says, is it Brookley or Brookley?
Yeah, no, Brookley.
It's Brookley, not Brookley. I love that. I love the way, you've done that. But I also heard Mr. Harrison suggest that, gee, this is an economic thing, and it either falls to your profit line or to the buyers. And I'm thinking, I'm trying to balance the city and the future of the city. I'm trying to say, how do we get this built? How do we get it built without, ignoring this public debate that we had? And so I guess I come down on, I would have said 19 units instead of 20, to be honest with you, only because, if you take those three out, and I agree with Bennett, I looked at it, and I don't know, I'm not an engineer, I don't know, but you could probably work out the stormwater detention somehow so that it doesn't, it's not incursion, so. I don't know, I guess I don't have a question, that was just a comment.
If I
But,
can-
or if you'd like to.
Yeah, if I can
I'll ask you a
respond.
question then.
Yeah.
Do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that, and appreciate the feedback. It's going to be rare that we're going to find a project that where all interests align, and they often do come down to, in this case, when you have 22 units, they're all critical. I'd submit that you have, as part of your process, right, we have this concurrent, I keep calling it concurrent variance, but just the next step, let's call it. We're still going to have to go in front of and discuss those variances, and they're going to have to be weighed in on. And what I'd hope is that if you start by saying you have up to 22 units at your disposal, okay, that would be step number one. And we have to go back in and try to define more closely with our engineers, can we actually get that? I'd love it for site plans to not have any units on it, because I'd like it just to show land use and say, here's the category and this is the density. And the configurations shouldn't be immaterial, but they are. So you have to show something. Yep, you have to show something. And it may be achievable to get 22 and stay out of buffers. It may not. I don't know yet.
All right, so this is a question, thank you, Mike. So Susan, this is a question for you or for Ben. So is there some wording that would say the issue here really, for me personally, I have no idea what the other commissioner would say. For me personally, it's not a density issue as much as it is a stream buffer issue. Is there some wording that you might suggest that would eliminate or change item number one to say, okay, it's approved, conditional on not encroaching on the stream buffer? I'm trying to figure out how to say yes to this, is what I'm trying, that's all I'm trying to do, understand that. I'm trying to figure out how to say yes.
1 second.
Okay with 22.
You could just say yes.
It would be subject to the conditions.
Let them confer for a moment. I know, we'd like to have these these general discussions.
You have to try, huh?
And if I may, regarding condition number 15.
Yeah.
That condition is written in a manner that does not prohibit encroachment of the buffer. It just limits it to the outer 25.
No, I appreciate that, but that would still have to go to the ZBA, there would still be go through that process. And, from my point of view, as I said earlier, in the other cases, I'm not the attorney on the board here, so I'll accept that that's a wording that, is, but in general, I'm concerned. So is there some wording that you might suggest, or do we need to?
Well, it would be if you want to recommend approval, but with no encroachment in the stream buffer, that's what you would recommend.
Okay.
And you would analyze the 15 conditions here to see if anything in the conditions needs to be replaced or reworded in that regard.
So we would.
Because we certainly would want you to include the conditions also that we've recommended here. So-
Right.
Okay.
I'm not suggesting
We just
not.
modify number one.
I guess I'm
Right.
suggesting
Correct.
whoever made the motion, which would not be, that it would modify number one to say the subject property should be limited. The subject property could be, I don't know how we would say it.
Yeah, I got you.
But because that's my issue, is keep it out of the stream buffer. I cannot vote for something after all this public debate. I can't just ignore our citizenry who said, don't go into the stream buffer.
But, Mr. Chairman, keep in mind, there's two aspects associated with the stream buffer. One, associated with land disturbance,
Yeah.
and two, specific to impervious sort of surface associated with the stream buffer, meaning, as you can see from 22 and 21, those are actual impervious surface located within.
And that's where that was where I was coming from.
Right, and is that, okay, so you may have to make a clear distinction to a certain point, meaning, because there's going to be some land disturbance associated with it. There would
Leave
be
that up to you.
grading.
I'll leave that up to the staff or the techno. I would just suggest that there'd be no, impervious.
Permanent improvement.
You could say impervious surface or impervious coverage to encroach within the limits of the stream buffer.
If someone could help me out here. So with that, are there any other questions?
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, just on that, if we actually omitted any reference to the stream buffer question, isn't it by default, there's no encroachment? And then if there's going to be an encroachment, that would then go before the ZBA?
Well, technically, yes, but I think what the chairman was implying, there's a specific sort of intent behind it. Commissioner Levy, you're correct in that, yeah, that would be the actual process. But, if, based upon your intent.
Right.
I think we had to make that distinction.
Because I'm trying to say, if we go to the council, what are we telling the council? Okay, we heard everybody. We heard the 22 units, great. Well, you can build what you want. I heard the landowner say, hey, I've got to have this is what the deal is, and we want it because it improves the street. I agree.
But I'm going to make a guess here.
Okay.
That even if we say this, we can't take away his constitutional right to go and apply for a variance.
understand.
If in fact,
Absolutely.
so we're going
That's
to
fine.
volley this back to ZBA if there's an encroachment and he wants to proceed based on that encroachment.
I
Okay,
think.
all right, well, that's good.
Yeah, I'm trying to get if I'm making a recommendation to the city council, I'd like the city council to know that I'm okay with this development, but I don't want it in a stream buffer. Now, what legally they can do or not, I can't. I guess what the staff was saying is by limiting it to 20, that's, but it's essentially stuff to go before this, because there's,
If he can't reconfigure it to make it work.
yeah. All right, any other
We'll have to roll
questions?
the
Any other
dice on
questions?
ZBA. No.
Then I will entertain a motion. I'm not supposed to do my own motion.
I was going to say, you do your own motion,
I'm not
Stan. You know
supposed
what
to
you
do-
want, so.
That's right. I'm not supposed to do the vote. I can vote, but I can't.
Okay.
You want to try it, John? Can you?
All right, let's try this. I would like to make a motion that we approve zoning number. There we go.
RZ
That we approve
14-10.
RZ 14-10 with the condition listed, recommended by staff, with revisions to number one, that the subject property shall be limited to a maximum dwelling units per acre of 20 townhome units, with the elimination of units 21 and 22. Let me restate number one.
We're going to
Let
give
me
him
restate
22,
number one.
yeah.
All right,
We can give him 22, but we're not going to.
Right,
all right.
up to 22.
Up to 22 without disturbing and providing any impervious covering to the subject property.
To not the subject property.
To the stream buffer?
To the stream
To the
buffer.
stream buffer.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll second the
You
motion.
did better than I did, but do we need to?
Do not ask me to repeat it.
No, I got it.
You got it? I mean, okay, so we have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion? Okay, I'm going to discuss just for a moment and say, I think this, I'm very I mean, this is tough. We want you to build, we want the landowners to move forward, we want the city to benefit from it, but we have to respect the public debate on things like stream buffers and tree canopy and those things. So, all in favor of the recommendation to approve with the modification to number 1 as stated, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
Much better.
Who was the second on that? I'm sorry. Oh, thank you.
The one who got them to turn it around and
Yes, thank you.
got to turn this
Much
thing
improved.
around.
The process worked.
I loved it.
The process
It
worked.
did.
No, it was really,
It did.
it was, all right. Good job, guys. One more to go. Yeah, I don't see how many more.
Don't tell Shannon.
This is- Okay, let me get back to my tab here. Becky would say if I was using the computer, I would have to. I know, I just do better this way. All right, so, on to new business. And we'll start off by saying, thank you for sticking with us. Think how much you've learned tonight about all kinds of things. This is RZ 14-11, Haven Real Estate Investments, a rezoning request from R75 to RA8. And it's Briarwood Hills Drive.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The request is to rezone 2 existing parcels from R75 to RA8 to develop four single-family detached lots. Per the proposal, as previously stated, there are 2 existing R75 lots. Of the 4, in terms of the newly subdivided lots, Lot 4 will remain, but staff would note that the existing building, however, will not be compliant with the rear yard setback based upon this rezoning to RA8, in which, for that specific lot, the applicant would have to seek a variance to reduce the rear yard setback. To quickly mention, based upon the proposal, the development would total 7.2 dwelling units per acre as the proposed density. Staff would note that the property is located within the suburban character area, and the suburban character area, it states that the intent of the character area is to protect stable neighborhoods from incompatible development that could alter established residential development patterns and density, and also to ensure that new development and redevelopment is compatible with existing residential uses. Although there are existing RA8 zoning within the area, and somewhat prevalent, you could say, within the Brookhaven Fields area, it is relegated to those portions or areas of the neighborhood that has direct frontage or connection to a road. And also, it's relegated to specific transitional nodes, and they also act as transitions from what you would consider higher density uses to relatively low density uses. In this case, if you look to the north, there are existing RA8, that those 4 lots are bordered directly by Briarwood, Kusawati, and Telford. And then extending from that, it does transition from the road to the R75s. In this particular case and this request, as you can see, the positioning of the lots would not be an extension of the existing RA8, but in essence, it will be located in between 2 lesser dense zoning districts, R75s. So just to reiterate, the existing character of interior lots within the area appear to be stable and support compatibility with R75 zoning district regulations. However, infill development within this area should maintain a density that is consistent within the R75 zoning district unless it is directly adjacent to existing higher density zoning and the transitional use was to be extended. With that said, staff has recommended denial of the request of RZ 1411. However, as I stipulate to the report, I would also like to point out, just in case, depending on the decision that could come about from the Planning Commission, staff did provide some conditions as guides or as a guideline, depending on the outcome of this request.
I love that,
Thank you.
just in case. Before we move on, just to make sure, because the correction I believe you sent out, that is not correct. Is that right? The RM 100s are actually R75?
Yes,
Would
sir,
you
as
comment on
stated
that
in the
for-
report, and with the official zoning map being readopted, on August 12th. We did confirm that what's shown as RM 100 on the site plan submitted in actuality is zone R75.
Okay, thank you. All right, and with that, we will open up public comment. Well, no, we need the applicant first. Need the applicant before we start talking about it, right? So,
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your time. My name is Allison Resnick. I am a Brookhaven resident, have been since 2005, and I work for Haven Real Estate Investments. We have been approached and asked by a couple of our clients to assist them with the rezoning process. We've got two current residents that both are interested. Their interests are different. One of the gentlemen is literally looking to rezone his property to, kind of look around and see what's going on, and he wants to be a part of the growth of the city of Brookhaven. And because his lot is conducive to do so, he wanted to entertain it. The other lot that we're looking at, it's actually a lady who is trying to retire. She's trying to get her nest egg together so she can move closer to her family. We've been working on this for quite some time. As you can see, if you go down further on Kusawati towards Telford, there are 4 existing RA8 homes there right now. Those were also built and constructed by Haven REI. We unfortunately got stuck in the mess of DeKalb County, and they cost us a lot of money and a lot of time on the project. Fortunately, we were able to come to City of Brookhaven and do our final plat through them. So we are really trying to be consistent with what we've started there. The whole road is not conducive for this. In our research, the most northern property or the one on the top would be the one that is actually the last that qualifies. There are 2 R75s still in between. One of them is potentially looking for rezone, and another may be doing in the future. In our take, we're a Brookhaven builder. We named ourselves Haven Real Estate Investments for Brookhaven. We build in Brookhaven. We are very active with the city of Brookhaven, the support of the city. We're currently building the bathroom at Briarwood Park. We have worked a lot around the area. And we had a public participation meeting about a month or 2 ago, and I had about a dozen people there with no significant negative comments. And actually, Ben's comment was the first I've heard any negativity toward this from any of the city staff. I haven't had that indication at all. So I was really kind of surprised to hear them with that recommendation. We feel like it's a good use of the space that's currently there. As Ben stated, there is a lot of R8 in this area. And as we all know, the city of Brookhaven is a growing city that people are looking and fighting to find a way to be in this city. When these people are looking and fighting and you can't find lots because there are not lots for sale, that's where builders and developers come in. And that's where we go and work with people in order to try to make new homes for people that satisfies the residents, satisfies the neighbors, and also continues to bring more families into this area. I know the biggest opposition that I've heard from folks has really been the density and the traffic. But if you look back to the early 1900s, at some point, all of this was farmland. Somebody came in and started developing, and it just didn't stop there. So it's not like we're the first ones coming in trying to develop. And if you continue to go up Kusawati, you'll see that most of the homes on Kusawati have already been or are about to be developed in the same manner. So we feel it's a good fit for the city. We feel it's a good fit for the neighborhood. We feel it falls in line with the character. We're not coming in and trying to put, crazy mini mansions or anything. We're trying to put affordable housing for people to come and be able to live the lifestyle in the city of Brookhaven that all of us are sitting or fighting for. So with that, here for any comments, questions, and would hope that everybody would entertain this. Thank
So
you.
you're going to reserve the rest of your time?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so now we'll open up the public hearing. And do we have any cards, any comment cards, either in support of this?
I do have one in support and one in opposition.
Okay,
Okay, starting with the support.
please.
Kim Keating, please.
I'm sorry, the last name?
Kim Keating, Keating.
Hi, my name is Kim Keating, and I am the owner of the lot directly north adjacent to this property. I have in process with you all which I submitted on August the 6th, another request to rezone from R75 to RA8 to RA8 lots. So the point of my statement is that there is going to be contiguous RA8, excuse me, from lower down on Kusawati, coming all the way up. The neighbor next door to me, which would be the one sandwiched between, if we get approved, they have been fully supportive. They are also interested at some near future time in doing the same thing. The timing is not right for them. Briefly, the mother in the family who lived there for 60-plus years deceased over the summer, and her sons were unable to entice her to move closer to them. And so, they always have had in mind to be a part of this development, but the timing right now is not right. It's too soon after her death. So this seems to be, in the response that you've made to the current Haven application, to me, the way I read it, seems to be the biggest concern is that there is not a continuity in the RA8 zoning coming up the street, that there's the two lots there that make it not continuous. And that's really what I wanted to say.
Okay, well, thank you, Ms. Keating. And thank you for waiting all all these hours. Think how much you've learned about concurrent variances and the comprehensive plan. All right. Ben?
Yes, and we have no more in support. In opposition, Don Green.
Mr. Green?
Howdy. Thank you for entertaining me today.
Your address?
Live at 1344 Brookhaven Gardens Lane. If you look at the street there next to the Kusawati, it's Cortez. I live on the corner of Cortez and Brookhaven Gardens. It's too bad I didn't get involved in this process earlier. I would have put my opposition in on those 4 homes that were built there up on the corner. My main concern is traffic, and I share with Mr. Funny transportation woes in Brookhaven now. I asked the question, did anybody do a traffic study on Kusawati for this rezoning? Has that been brought up to anybody?
This is your opportunity.
Okay, well, I'm
to
throwing
speak
those
with us.
questions
That's
out.
good.
I went out and
Rhetorical
measured.
questions are good.
I went out and measured the, from curb to curb, face of curb to face of curb on Cortez, and we've got 26 feet. Go out there on Kusawati where you have all the traffic, it's 21 feet. To me, that's unacceptable. If you consider this rezoning, you either need to make Kusawati a one-way street or put it so there's no on-street parking. You go out there, when their contractors were working out there, you couldn't even get down the street. And my concern is fire trucks. You know, how wide is a fire truck? And then you got cars parking up and down the street, people visiting the homes that are going to be built there. What happens in those cases? So I ask you to consider that. All right? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. We appreciate it. And again, just as we do with Ms. Keating, we appreciate your sticking with it, or sticking with us tonight.
No more speaker cards, Mr.
All
Chairman.
right, so with that, we will close the public comment section.
Mr. Chairman, the applicant does have rebuttal.
Oh,
time.
I'm sorry. Ms. Resnick, you've got some time left? He keeps us honest with,
I
make
know,
sure
they're
everybody
pretty
gets
good
there.
like that. To Don's point, on-street parking being not allowed, we don't have a problem with that. I'm a resident, I live right on Briarwood. I travel Kusawati absolutely every day. Kusawati was a traffic nightmare before any of these properties were built, honestly. If you drive up and down Kusawati, you'll see there's a lot of houses there, so there's a lot of traffic coming down. The road's always been narrow, and I don't think anybody has any plans to really make any difference. To Kim's point, I understand the concern of the lack of continuity, but I do think that a lot of our city has come to that as a lot of these opportunities have presented themselves. Like I said, there is not a lot there's not a lot of development. So builders and developers are having to go and develop existing homes and existing lots. And that's how we've made the city of Brookhaven as vibrant and growing as it is. If we weren't allowed to do these kind of things, most of the opportunities in Brookhaven would not have been built to this extent. So my request is that we, take some strong consideration under this and understand that, like I said, I've really had minimal to no public negative opinion. We had people in high support of the other one, and we did not rezone the first property, just so you know. Oh, he's not even here. We bought it from somebody else. But I just respectfully request that we look into this further and understand that in my opinion and in many of the neighbors' opinion, it's not a negative impact. If anything, we're bringing more taxpayers into our city of Brookhaven and focusing on all the things that all of you keep saying that you want to do. Infill comes up continuously. This is part of infill. This is how a city has grown, and we would love to be able to do this. So, thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, now can I close the public hearing? Yes. Okay, public hearing is closed, and we'll open it up to questions. I guess we'll start on, we start on this, doesn't matter. How about in the middle?
Okay.
We'll start with.
A question for staff. The lots that are immediately south, 2313, 2307, 2303, et cetera, going down, at what point, because if you look at the map, the lots progressively get narrower. At what point are you no longer able to rezone to RA8 because you just won't meet setback requirements for split lots?
Well, more than the setback requirement, the initial question would be lot size. And the lot size would be based upon the fact that if they're to move forward with this request, moving down, gradually down, lower, moving south to an RA8, RA8 requires that you have a minimum lot size of 6,000 square feet. So essentially, you would need at minimum 12,000 in order to make that happen. And it is true, like the applicant stated, it does taper as you go down south. And I believe the two additional R75s that are directly south of the proposed, the subject property, I believe those may be the last two. I may be wrong, but it may be 2 to 3 more.
Bert?
All right. Well, currently, these properties are surrounded by R75 on each side, right?
Yes.
So, and this is for the staff. Then the houses that are going to be built, since they're going to be in a different zoning category, will they be sort of exempt, or the average setback rule is not going to apply to them?
In this particular case, it appears that it would not. There are certain criteria that have to be met. I believe there's 3 mainly, meaning the 3 being 60% of the lot would have to be developed. That's 1, which they qualify for. 2 would be that the homes face on or front of this face the same street frontage, the orientation of the home, and also within the same zoning district. So with that said, I don't believe the average setback would apply.
All right. And then also, because they're this is the adjacent to the R75, is there also like a buffer, additional, like a 20-foot buffer that goes in between them?
In this case, being that the use of the property would remain the same and similar in that it would be both single-family detached uses, there would not be a buffer required.
Okay. Those are the questions I have.
John?
I was reading the conditions, and I think I heard part of the question Brett was asking. The setback for the RA8 is what compared to the R75?
Well, the front, first off, is totally different. And again, we put additional conditions here to booster the setback requirements typically, which is not required for our RA8. With the RA8, the home itself could be set back as close as 5 feet from the property line, except for the garage must be set back 20 feet from back of curb. Compared to an R75, in this case, it may be an average front yard setback, or typically 35 feet.
And from, okay, that's it.
Okay, I have a few, and then we'll come back. Okay, first is kind of a comment. one thing that struck me as I looked at it is there was a new home being built at 2303 Briarwood Hills. And it is an R75 lot, and a new home is being built there. The other is, although I don't have the date, that the house at 2323 Briarwood Hills, which is on the current property, is a recently built home in the last, certainly in the last, I don't know if you have a date on it, but it certainly, and I guess those two homes suggested to me that the current property has reasonable economic value as currently zoned. I mean, that's the first thing that struck me was as I looked at it, I said, boy, they're already building houses there with our, and selling them, obviously. Then two other items that I guess part of it was because of the comprehensive plan and my role in it, is one of the guiding principles of the comprehensive plan is protection of the tree canopy. And the thing that I noticed is those 4 lots that were zoned in 2007, not by y'all, don't have a single overstory tree on them. Those 4 houses are devoid of overstory trees. It was clear, and if you look at Google Maps in 2013, it was, I mean, those lots were clear cut. I mean, they looked like they had to be. But if the guiding principle of the comprehensive plan is to protect, in the city, is protect the tree canopy, putting 4 lots and with impervious surface is just incompatible with it. The second item I had is the character of the neighborhood, and the 4 properties of the corner, just to me, didn't blend very well with the thing. So, I mean, there's a tree, I don't know if anybody's done a tree, if they've done a tree inventory, but there were certainly large trees along Kusawati on those properties. So, I guess I don't have any questions. I mean, I looked at those lots and that, so, I don't know, anybody else have I shouldn't say that. Do anybody have a question?
I guess my only question would be first for the applicant as to whether or not they would accept all of the conditions that the staff has imposed. I have a lot of comments that are similar to yours, but that would be my question.
Okay.
First.
So I guess the question to you, Mr. Resnick, is if the planning commission were to say, we approve it, but we're going to approve it conditioned with the 12 conditions, would all 12 conditions be acceptable to you?
I have not had a chance to look through the conditions, but we work very nicely with others, and I don't see any reason why we couldn't. May I address your tree comment you made? I just want everybody to know that we actually tried to save as many trees on that 4 lot as possible, and DeKalb County absolutely mandated and required us to clear cut that back lot. I just want to make sure that everybody knows, like, we don't condone clear cutting. We are all about the tree ordinance and saving the trees.
If I in any way implied that it was Haven, I didn't mean to.
Sure.
All I can tell you was a lot was good, but we don't want to
Sure.
can't get into discussion about that.
And the only other thing would be the tree canopy on the 2 lots that we're talking about. There are not a lot of trees back there anyway. Like you said, one of them was already rebuilt. He personally has taken down most of his trees before he built. The second home actually is pretty much wide open. There are a cluster of trees behind the fence on Kusawati, but their lots don't really have anything that would indicate any clear cutting. There's a couple of trees.
All right, thank you. Let's see, hold on, yeah, please, Ms. Wright. So I think you've answered the question. Let's see if somebody else has a question for you.
Sure.
Yeah.
With respect to the current zone, and it's zoned as RM 75, why is it that?
No, just R75.
R75, RM, R75. Why is it that you can't replace the lot with the R75 property?
Well, it's not a matter of cannot. It's not a matter of we can't. We obviously did a large second-story addition and renovation on 2323 Briarwood Hills. It's not a matter of we can. It's a matter of it was started at part of the street. the neighborhood, the neighbors seemed to get behind it. It was something that we felt was a good opportunity, and it's something that those homeowners felt was a good opportunity. Like I said, the one lady, she's simply trying to retire close to her family. It makes most sense to her to make her lot as profitable as possible, and by doing that, it would require her to be able to do this. And she was literally 5 square feet over that 12,000. So we're not trying to push anything necessarily, we're just trying to help make these lots as valuable as possible, and we feel that there is good intent.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? One last question for staff. It was just, I understand there were other neighbors who were in favor of this. Did we get any emails or anything from people who, other than the 2 lot owners who supported this, we can't read them into the record, as I understand it, but.
No, we did not.
Okay. All right, well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else have anything? Then with that, I'll entertain a motion on RZ 14-11. Why is it always quiet at this point?
I'd like to make,
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to move that we recommend denial of RZ 1411.
second.
Okay, we have a motion to deny and a second. Any discussion on the motion? Okay,
certainly-
all in favor of denial, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Nay? Okay, thank you. So we're going to recommend denial. And we're wrapping up, guys.
Mr. Chairman, there is one item that I left out as part of the organizational procedural.
Oh,
Well, I believe we do have a special call meeting scheduled for September 18th as a
We do.
reminder.
okay. So to repeat, as a reminder, we had a limited number of, didn't we poll?
I'm sorry.
Didn't we poll on the 18th to have?
Yes, to make sure we would have a quorum.
We do have a, so if anybody, changes schedules, please let staff know. So right now,
There will be amendments to the sign ordinance and amendments to the zoning ordinance on the agenda.
okay, and if we can get Chris, and if Chris Boddicker gets trained, then,
And he actually just gave me 3 dates, and I'll check with you, Mr. Chairman, and with Mr. Thomas.
great. Thanks. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move that we adjourn.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Oh, I can't second
Any
my own motion.
discussion? Any discussion? All those in favor of adjourning? signify